I have a request or change that I would like to propose, and this is not specifically for tonight. And Natalie, I guess I'm not really sure what the proper procedure is. But as I'm thinking about Corcoran, one thing that I want to make sure doesn't kind of fall off our radar is our police and fire. As we're growing, I want to make sure that those departments are being given the resources that they need. And so I would like to invite both the police chief and the fire chief to a future planning commission meeting, if that is possible.
Mr. Chair, I believe it's possible. I know that we don't have a current fire chief for Rogers because we have multiple fire chiefs and for in different districts. And Brad, I said his name was, he has just retired. So I know, so I think it kind of depends on what the meeting discussion would be about that we'd want to invite them to. So I don't see why we can't invite them. I don't know that they would have time in their schedule to do it, especially if it's not something clear as to why. Like if it's a proposal that you would like their input on, I think that would be something you can ask them to do.
Okay.
But
Yeah, because I think the purpose would be, because I've talked to some citizens and they're telling me that they're having a hard time getting home insurance coverage because their home is too far away from the nearest fire station. So I guess I am trying to kind of look down the road a little bit, and if there are going to be consequences of quick growth without growing our public safety departments at a comparable rate, I'd rather kind of start getting that on city council's radar sooner instead of later. So
yes, Mr. Chair, I hear what you're saying, and I believe there is some campus planning being done. Part of that is looking at some space for an actual fire department. Maybe Councilor Schultz has more to say about that, but it sounds like it would be more of a topic to bring forth at a council meeting because they would be, that's within their purview in terms of providing more resources to those functions of city government.
okay. Well, maybe I'll attend a meeting and make that proposal. All right, thank you. Next item is the appointment of a vice chair. Are any of you commissioners interested in taking on that hopefully minimal responsibility? No?
I would.
And I would make a motion to nominate Commissioner Brumman as vice chair. Could I get a motion on?
I motion.
Or I guess I'll make a motion. Can I get a second? Second. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Congratulations. Thank you for taking on that responsibility, Commissioner. Open forum. So I'm gonna.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. You do need a formal motion and second and vote on the agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could I would like to make a motion to then approve the agenda. Could I get a second? I'll second that. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that'll carry. Thank you. So I'm going to open up the floor to the public to discuss any items that are not already on tonight's agenda. But one thing that I will ask, whether you're in person or on Zoom, I will ask that comments be kept to 5 minutes or less. So with that, I'll open up the floor. Do we have any? Is there anything that you would like to address with the Planning Commission?
I wasn't sure if you change over 2221
Thank you, sir.
just checking to find out, it was kind of vague that you were still talking about the strip warehouse up on 55 there, but we're just concerned about the water runoff down Wilmington, 55 there, you know, when you do which I wasn't sure if that was in the docket, but it's probably been taken care of.
Yeah, I guess I would ask, staff, could you?
Yeah, if I could, Mr. Chair, I think you're talking about the Highway 55 Business Park on
Yeah.
Pioneer Trail.
They were just down, yesterday morning, getting all the elevations and everything for the run. You know, to find out where the water's gonna run off from that area coming through the neighborhood. That's what we were concerned.
And so what I would say is the large industrial park has preliminary approval. They are not authorized to begin construction. They will need to come back to the council for final plat and final PUD approval. And then next to that, to the east, there is an approved project for garages to a mini storage building that has approval but is not yet authorized to begin work, but that will begin shortly. That they have an item on next week's council agenda to allow some early grading. So it has preliminary.
If they show how the water is supposed to run.
Yep, if you want to, we do have an approved plan, so if you want to give our Public Works Director, Kevin Matson, a call.
There's the card out front.
Yeah, I can, I could grab a card for you. Sure. And he could share the plans with you and walk you through that.
Oh, great. Thank you for coming to me. I appreciate it.
It was just a little vague that.
Sure.
Was really brought up.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I'm sorry, do you have any other topics that you would like to address? No? That was it, one and done?
One and done.
Okay, thank you, sir. And do we have anyone on Zoom that would like to?
Members of the public online, if you would like to participate in the open forum for topics not on the agenda tonight, please raise your hand utilizing the raise your hand feature under the reactions menu. Mr. Chair, no, I'm jumping in.
Okay, with that, let's see, do I need to make a motion to close that, or do we just move on? Okay, thank you. That's what I thought. So with respect to the minutes from the April 2023 meeting, commissioners, are there any questions or comments about the minutes from last month's meeting?
No, Chair, and I would make a motion to approve that.
Okay, can I get a second?
A second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Oh, and I was an aye and I did not say. I guess that will carry. Thank you. And now, new business, and this will include, correct, a public comment opportunity. So our business tonight starts with a public hearing on the planned unit development district standard zoning amendment, which is City File 22-045. This is an item that we've been talking about for several months now, and since it is our only item this evening, I'm looking forward to hearing some in-depth comments. Natalie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you said, this was a city council driven project to update, do a zoning ordinance amendment to update our planned unit development district, also known as PUDs, with the idea of adding more standards for the review and approval process. At this time, there are two options in front of you. Option one is a review system based on points. The PUDs applications would need to meet a threshold of 75% of available points based on the project for a staff recommendation of approval to report to the commission and council. The second option is an unweighted review system. Basically, the point system would be converted into a public benefit policy document that clearly defines our expectations, but does not have points assigned. But the idea is this type of document would still provide staff, guidance to negotiate with developers.
And I'm sorry, wasn't there a third option, status quo?
Yes, you also have the option to, recommend denial I'll end that. But yes, there technically is a third option for your recommendation. As I said, the city council identified this as a 2022 priority, so we've been working on this for about a year, a little less than a year. Council directed staff at the beginning to identify basic standards for PUDs, create a point system to aid the review, as well as create a supermajority requirement for the approval of future PUDs. There were 3 work sessions in total, 1 joint work session with yourself. And there has been 2 discussions at regular meetings to refine the PUD ordinance. Again, planning commission was involved with the joint work session, and then you've also provided us individual feedback over email that was discussed at the March 23rd meeting. So thank you for providing that to us. The significant changes in the draft ordinance as presented based on as compared to our current ordinance. Several provisions have been added to limit the ability to add uses within a PUD district that are not typically allowed in the underlying zoning or land use category. Specifically, this will affect low density residential areas within the MUSA, and that will be referring to the guiding and the comp plan to make that determination. They would be limited to uses identified in one of our urban residential districts, RSF1, RSF2, and RSF3. So basically, it would allow for single family homes and twin homes in those types of PUDs, but townhomes would be specifically prohibited. Several basic design standards were added, such as appropriate integration with existing and proposed surrounding development, variety and enhanced architectural design. Next slide. Open space has been a significant discussion, and unfortunately the table has kind of gone over my words. I apologize. The idea being one of the main requests that we see for PUDs is a smaller lot width and smaller lot size. And so the idea being the council is open to having smaller lot sizes if more open space can be provided in return. There is some concern. Recently, staff has seen a couple of examples that unfortunately, I don't have an example I can share with you tonight. I am going to ask someone to prepare something for me so I have a visual for council. But the percentage of open space required can leave very little land for additional amenities to accommodate the additional public benefits the council wants to see, and may actually encourage smaller lots rather than encouraging larger lots. I've specifically seen a problem with people who want to stay at 55 feet and are trying to provide a variety of lot sizes. There is no room for the 12% open space and no room for additional public benefits. So it's kind of contradictory to our other goals. And so at this time, I'm recommending adding language that would allow the city council to waive or reduce this requirement when it makes sense. And the proposal is providing as much open space as possible for the constraints of the site, while still meeting the density goals that we've outlined as a city. So just trying to avoid the need for a variance in a PUD, because with a PUD, one of the main principles behind it is you shouldn't need a variance. So trying to provide some discretion and wiggle room. The idea is we'll start at these percentages, and when we're looking at the sketch plan, we'll work with council and the developer to reach a number that may make more sense if it can't be accommodated, specifically with smaller sites and seeing that's an issue.
Not to interrupt, but this would only impact option 1 and not option 2, correct?
Both options. Both
Both
options. Yeah, this was identified as an underlying design threshold, and it does make sense that the percentages might be too high without some ability to waive or reduce.
Okay, are you sure about that?
Yes,
Option 2.
so basically there's 2 parts. There's design standards that have been added that every PUD must meet. And those aren't really public benefits, so they're just the design standards, that's the minimum. And then the points or no points, those are additional 27 public benefits that have been identified. And there is some talk of open space in those as well, that's above this minimum. But regardless of which option you go with, this is still a table in the underlying ordinance.
Okay, so this is still a table in the underlying ordinance, but is really not impacted whether the point system is adopted or the guidance
Correct, yeah.
standard.
This,
Okay.
yeah,
thank you
this
for
would still be
clarifying.
there. This only applies to low density. I'll clarify that. So this wouldn't cause an issue for medium density or mixed use or anything like that. The low density residential in the MUSA would be subject to this table. I did add language to clarify that PUD in the rural residential that have an open space and preservation option, which sometimes can trigger a PUD if we need a community well or septic system. Clarified that this wouldn't apply to that because they're already providing about 50% open space. So there, it's a little convoluted in terms of when it actually applies, but basically low density residential in the MUSA, this table would apply regardless of which option you choose tonight. The only change I'm recommending at this time is giving the city council some discretion to waive or reduce the percentages when it makes sense to. So. Additionally, one of the questions I outlined in the staff report was, does it make sense to allow some recreational improvements within the open space areas to make it a more desirable feature for the immediate residents to maintain indefinitely as part of their HOA? Additional changes include a perimeter landscape buffer requirement for any type of home along arterial and major collector roads. Public access must be provided to natural features such as lakes and creeks. PUDs cannot request less than a 15-foot side separation between detached dwellings. The wall of homes effect, so basically just a linear line of homes along a arterial or major roadway, that would be a prohibited design feature. And just screening and buffering standards cannot be reduced without showing a site constraint and proposing an alternative method or putting the screening somewhere else on the site. Still counting. So it can't be completely waived essentially without making some effort to include it elsewhere on the site. Define public benefit policy document is what we were talking about with option one or option two, I apologize. And so we're either going to have the language in there that keeps it as a threshold for points, or I provided in the staff packet some language where we could change it to just a public policy document with an unweighted category. I'm sorry, with unweighted category. So no points. Points or no points, and that will be, I believe it's subdivision 7. So that will definitely be a point of discussion for the planning commission tonight. If option 1 is desired, staff also recommends a slight change to the language so the points only apply for PUDs that exceed a pre-development net acre of 30 acres. Again, seeing this applied actually in some sketch plans coming in that haven't submitted a formal application, so I don't have something to show you tonight. 30 acres is very difficult to get any kind of points as when you were talking about meeting that 75% threshold. While there are public benefits they can provide, I don't think that anything less than 30 acres developable area is going to be able to provide multiple like the categories to reach a 75% threshold. Neighborhood meetings will be required before a preliminary PUD application, before the application can be considered complete. A 4/5 majority of seated council is required for approval. And then we have the 27 public benefits identified. I know you've all read this. I don't want to go through the list, but we have a variety of benefits, including placement of uses, collaboration with adjoining users, percentage of units within identifiable neighborhood focal point, use of visual termini, such as oh my goodness, I forgot the word, what we have up here.
A gazebo.
Gazebo, thank you, I'm sorry. Attached units are embedded, exceptional landscaping, next slide. Use of trail connections internal to the site, some open space requirements, or not requirements, the open space options, so making the open space that enhanced more so than what is required as a minimum. And lots of landscaping. We did take Commissioner Brumman's comment about use of native plants in landscaping. We added a new category for use of preferred trees in landscaping based on our Northeast District list. That was the request of Councilor Nichols. Next slide. We have lot size variety as a public benefit. The idea being, they provide multiple different sizes of lots, not just 55-foot lots across the board. That is beneficial. Larger tree sizes at time of planting is a new one that came out of our last council meeting. And then some of our more trickier bonus, they used to be bonus categories. If you don't do the points, they'll just be additional categories people can try to hit. So natural restoration work, environmental protection, and innovation and utilization of new technologies and materials. So tonight, we asked the planning commission to open the public hearing and take any testimony. The planning commission has the following options, as we touched on briefly. You can recommend approval of the draft ordinance as it's currently prepared by staff. I'm calling this option 1. You can make this recommendation and still make some changes as well as part of your recommendation. Option 2 is to recommend approval of the draft ordinance with an update to a PUD public benefits policy. Comes off rolls right off the tongue. That's option 2. And proposed language can be made to change any relevant portions of the ordinance that you'd like. I'm sorry, the proposed language change to the relevant portion of the draft ordinance is provided in the staff report, and you can make additional changes. I apologize. And then the third option, of course, is to recommend denial of the draft ordinance, which would keep everything status quo. That's what I have for you.
Very good. Thank you. I'd like to open the public hearing at this point. In-person comments will be taken first. Sir, do you have anything that you'd like to add to the discussion? You get preferential treatment because you're here. All right. Thank you. Do we have anyone online with comments?
Members of the public online, if you'd like to participate in the public hearing for the zoning ordinance amendment to Planned Unit Development District, please utilize the raise your hand function under the reactions menu. Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing anyone raise their hand at this time.
Okay, thank you. With that, could I get a motion to close the public hearing? Motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? I guess I just want to start by saying if it's helpful, I was thinking we could organize tonight's discussion into 2 parts. Part 1, I'd like to march through the changes to the code. You know, Natalie very nicely summarized those changes for us in the report, and I thought it would be helpful. Could you pull up changes to sections 2, 3, and then 4, 6, and then 7? And then second, I thought we should separately discuss the category / points document. Does that sound okay with everyone? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay,
We are pulling up the staff report right now.
awesome, thank you.
Page 1 of 15. It's page 1 of 15, is that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. There we go.
Perfectly clear. Yeah. It's easy to read. Like my eyes aren't bad.
You want me to zoom in on that, or do you have it? in front of you?
I think we all have it in front of us
Yeah.
as well.
Is it possible to zoom in just a
Mhm.
little bit so that if there is anyone at home, they can see it? So, starting with the proposed changes to the code, and in the interest of keeping, my comments short, I'll refrain from rehashing things that I've already said on multiple occasions about this proposal. Except to say that I think that the point system should be considered as guidance only to developers, not counted as some kind of a scored rubric. The reason for this, I believe, is twofold. One, I think that it accomplishes the objective of giving developers more clarity going into an application, which saves time, but I also think that it builds trust. And two, if it is for points, to even get a foot in the door to get an audience with city council, developers are going to rely on that, and it's going to cost them money to obtain these points. And because it's relied upon as a pre-application requirement, I think that the city will bind itself regardless of any express language that says, quote, the city may still deny the application. I respectfully do not believe that this is the airtight escape clause that the city may believe that it is. And I just have a quick question. Has the city attorney provided any additional comment on that section specifically?
Yes, Mr. Chair, at the March 23rd meeting, I did talk with the council about guidance from the city attorney. He said basically that while the language is there, he does think that if a developer were to ever try to argue that their application was wrongfully denied, what they would use as evidence would be the staff analysis. So the city council would need to, in their findings of fact, provide why the staff analysis was mistaken, incorrect, or what additional factors they're considering that aren't being captured by the point system. So there is no precedent set because Maple Grove, who has a similar system, the buy-in is so high that they don't deny projects once they've met the point threshold.
Probably because they know they'll be sued.
I don't know if that's true. That's not what the planner said. He just said that they have not denied a project that has ever met the point threshold.
Okay. Thank you. So therefore, I am more comfortable with a set of criteria that is incorporated kind of like our district plans. So I'm in favor of this idea insofar as it is guidance to both the developer and to council. Therefore, I'll be upfront and I'll say I'm in favor of either option 2, which is guidance but no points, or option 3, which is maintaining the status quo. So as to the details of the proposal, I'd like to kind of march through the proposed code if we could. So unless others think otherwise, and I want to hear everyone's thoughts on this, I'm comfortable with these changes to 2, 3, and 4. Does anyone have any feedback or comments?
Are you talking about subdivision?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, subdivision 2, sub 2, 3, and 4.
Do we want to go through these things and then talk about what our recommendation is as far as council is?
Yeah,
Or-
yeah, I think, yeah,
Okay.
I was thinking we would talk about the edits that are being proposed, and if there are comments from my colleagues. I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I didn't have any, I mean, I didn't have anything that I was like, only talking about regarding like subdivision, so. You know, they're all fine.
Yeah, nor do I, I don't really comments in 2, 3, 4.
Not on those.
Okay. Commissioner G.
I don't have specific on the wording.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Now, if we could move to subdivision 6 and 7. Thank you. I'm also okay with these changes, other than what I was talking about before related to these being points requirements. Additionally, with respect to the language, quote, a score of 75% or higher does not guarantee city council approval. The city council shall use their statutory discretion in determining approval or denial of the PUD rezoning request, end quote. Again, my opinion, for what it's worth, I don't think that that will withstand scrutiny. Again, I think that if a developer relies on this and invests money in meeting the points threshold, they'll have a very strong case that the city does not have a reasonable basis to deny an application. Does anyone, do my colleagues have any feedback or comments about subdivision 6 or 7?
Since we're on subdivision 6, staff has the 2 questions outlined for the open space and the open space part of it. Just want to make sure. So if you have no comments on what's proposed and prefer what's proposed, that's perfectly fine. Just want to get your recommendation on the record.
Thank you.
Well, I will comment on it, and I think that what you bring up, Natalie, in your staff report was a concern. Because I think like it is one thing to see it on paper, but then when you try to apply it, whatever we adopt has to be able to work. And it has to be able to work in a broader sense and rather than a narrow sense. So all of that to say, if maintaining a high threshold and then just adding language that the staff or council can exercise discretion, if that is what's needed in order to bring a balance, but also provide a standard, then I'm okay with adopting the language that allows council to make, to use their discretion. I think the intent of it, right, is to correct me if I'm wrong, but if a PUD application came through with a lot of large lots, I don't necessarily think that because that would potentially meet the intent for that particular area, it isn't as if we would be so inflexible as to not consider that as a city, in fact. Because the council could decide in the spirit or the intent of the of bringing about something like this that would meet the spirit or the intent of something like that. And so that's why I would be fine with adding the language that would get to that council administration.
Thank you. Are there any other comments about?
Feedback on some of the specific questions the staff had raised. The 30-acre threshold, certainly understand that, recognizing the challenges of trying to accomplish all the things identified through the criteria with a small PUD. So I certainly would support that 30-acre limitation. And then the question on should recreational facilities be allowed within open space? Again, I think that flexibility would be something that would be beneficial to be able to allow those recreational facilities to be included in the open space, to be able to provide some amenities that otherwise might be a challenge if you strictly hold open space and say open space is truly open space.
I was curious about, I guess, the 7B there about the 10, why 10 points is the discretionary? It just seems like that could create a little bit, a lot. I mean, I think it's intended for some flexibility, right? That the city council could, something we didn't foresee, there's some benefit they've come up with, but it's only 10 points. I was just curious, but I think that when the max on other categories are 30 for some of these, why not 30? I was just curious.
That's it, Mr. Chair.
Oh, please.
Commissioner Van, that's a great point. We could certainly change that. The thinking was, again, as you said, provide some flexibility if we were to move forward with the point system to make sure if there's something that comes up that we didn't think of, that there is a route to request that to be honored. Typically, I'm foreseeing that happening as part of the sketch plan process, so that can be identified. I believe the reason why I was thinking 10 points is, the idea of, I want an identified point for sure, at level.
But just 30 was the
Yeah.
max of any other category. As if-
Right, so we
This
could
is city
certainly
council's
set
like,
30, yeah.
handing this out like, we think that's a 20, or.
My idea, I think, was being that if a developer truly has another public benefit they'd like to propose, the most they should really be counting on is 10 points, and they need to still be providing other public benefits. That was my thinking.
Yeah,
But we could certainly change that to 30. I think that could make sense as well.
yeah, it just leaves the discretion to
Yeah.
the, oh, we do, because how would that happen if it's not coming to the council until the points have been.
As part of the sketch plan discussion, they would identify, like, we would like to provide this as a public benefit. It's not currently marked in the point system. So I believe that's something that could be discussed at the sketch plan level.
Is that with,
That's with council.
that's with council, oh, okay, so the council might say, oh, okay, we can, you maybe weren't at that threshold. but
We're
we'll-
open
we'll-
to
we'll put you there.
considering, yeah, so that you can have a discussion about it, so that you can decide. And so that's why I think I identified 10 points, just that's probably the most they really should be counting on that specific public benefit. But I am not.
I'm just,
very
I mean, there could be something nobody's even thought about that,
Right,
like,
that's
and we
really
go, wow,
fantastic.
that is
Yeah.
a huge benefit.
We could certainly change that to 30 points if that's your recommendation.
Well, I'm not saying I'm supporting the points overall, I was just,
Sure.
I would say 30 if we're gonna do points, I mean,
Okay. Fair enough.
Well, I know we previously talked about the number of categories and what those categories were, and we do have 27. I still believe that's too many, but I'll let staff do their job and council do their job. I would be curious to see what that category would be. We haven't already considered the fact that this is pretty detailed, boy.
True. Yeah, I agree. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but things happen.
I have a few I could think of.
They'll build a road, so 30 points, we'll build a road. But that's some of the ones we've seen in these few, really, that's not a benefit.
Yeah, I don't think that one's gonna go over enough.
We'll build it here in Corcoran. It's benefit enough.
Tax revenue.
So, and I'm sorry, do we have any more?
On 6 and 7, we're still talking, right?
Yeah, 6 and 7.
Just a question for confirmation, I assume, but on G3, in regards to asking about exception for not meeting the buffering standards, I assume that would be then up to city's discretion to approve an alternative plan. Okay. thank you.
Yeah, that one used to be a very strict one, could not waive the requirement, and then of course, the plan comes in front of me, like, okay, for being too strict. Because again, I don't want a situation where we're having to grant a variance from the BUD district standard. So, I tried to work in some discretion right there for council to work with an applicant to not completely waive the requirement, but if there's a constraint, be suggest an alternative screening method that accomplishes the goal, and maybe moving the screening method to a more beneficial spot on the site. So that's the thinking there, but the additional language added was for discretion, that's the city.
I like
the application.
May I ask a question of clarification, though I know we're not discussing options right now, but I'm assuming as we're going through the language in what would potentially be the code, if option 2 is, if council goes with option 2, then all of the language regarding points, what happens to that in the code that we're looking at?
Yeah. So I
It
tried
would-
to highlight, I tried to highlight the area, the dark, yeah, it's dark blue on the printed
Yep.
copy. So subdivision 7, would need to be changed to language I provided in the staff report on
Yep.
page 5.
Okay. You have more code that we're discussing. That's fine. Can I just ask a clarification, on the 4/5 council meeting to approve a PUD? Does that, how does that work with the legal timeframe to work with applicants?
That is why it says seated instead of the 4/5 of the council.
Okay,
If we did forfeit of the council, that could definitely create situations where we're running up a deadline and it could be, not our fault, but on it's on the city that we can't get the full council, or we can't get, there's been time where we didn't have a quorum because we're sick. So things like that, trying to avoid it. The idea being if we have at least 3 people that are on the council, if they're seated, they still can take a vote. In that situation, 2 out of the 3 would not pass the PUD, a 3 out of 3 vote would. So that's the one downside, but through the options that we worked through, that seemed to be the risk that everyone was comfortable with taking.
and as long as it goes before, like, if it were to get that 2/3, right, like that,
Or fifth.
right, but I mean, 2 out of 3, sorry,
Yeah.
not 2/3. If it were to get that 2 out of 3 vote, that ends the process for the applicant at that point in time.
Correct. If they wanted to be, that would be the final decision. Our code does not allow for a similar application to be submitted. I believe it's 6 months. Like we saw with Lake Highlands, the council can be petitioned to waive that requirement. But they have to do a home application. So it would be the final decision, and likely they would make some revisions before they're comfortable coming back again.
But also then to clarify, generally speaking, it's not the first time. A PUD application is not the first time that a council is hearing about a particular project.
Correct, yes. And technically, we can extend it with preliminary plat, which is a component of the application. That's like a 120-day process. So it takes a couple meetings to get us there. That's fairly typical of some of the PUDs we can see.
Then I personally am ready to move on to the category. If anyone else. is.
Well, if we're hitting the section, the next one is the neighborhood meeting, which we're supposed to talk about. Right next, subdivision, subdivision 8, 6 of 16, right under the dark blue. So it looks like 8C is the neighborhood meeting, that's one of the topics, right? We're supposed to, right, so then next.
I feel like we did talk about that at the work session, so I didn't
Yeah.
recall it being highlighted as something that needed to be discussed tonight, but correct me if I'm
Yeah.
mistaken.
Well, I guess what I would say, if I could just maybe get like a status check-in, like what are the commissioners thinking? Are we thinking points, and you have to hit a minimum number of points in order to even be heard? Or are we thinking that this should simply be guidance and allow council to retain their discretion?
Before, I would like to make an informed vote, but being new, I would love to hear the context from the working session as far as the current process. What's not working? Why are we redefining? I'm just curious as to a little bit of context around, are we overloaded with PUD applications and thinking through it every time? I mean, what's the current scenario looking like as to why this is happening?
Natalie?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank
The context is our density goal, and we're going to talk about this in our training, so I don't want to get I don't want to repeat myself too much for later tonight. But our density goals within the MUSA, we need to hit 3 to 5 units, because that's what the Metropolitan Council has been, 3 to 5 units per acre. Because Metropolitan Council has identified that as the minimum efficiency for sewer infrastructure. And that is a regional system. So that's why we have some beholdens to them, because that part of town within our metropolitan urban service area, so it's our east and southern portions of town, that they are guided for city water and city sewer. And so we have those density goals. With our underlying zoning requirement, it's theoretically possible to hit 3 units per acre. It is proven very difficult. And then with current market conditions, it's not desirable of the developers who are looking to, provide housing options in the area. So with the there's several factors as to why, and some of it does come down to their profit, but it also comes down to the current market. There are people who prefer to have smaller lots. They don't want the big yard. So there is some preferences and they're trying to meet market demand. So everything residential and everything so far, but for new industrial has come in as a planned unit development. And the council felt that knowing that things are probably going to continue coming in as PUD, they wanted to have a better minimum threshold to point to and hold themselves to, so that we weren't just approving everything. They wanted a higher standard. They think the PUD should be benefit. There's the whole topic of public benefits, but it should be something that's, you know, amazing. And so we tried to go through a list of, we went through different options, but one of the things we looked at is Maple Grove has a point system where they've clearly identified categories where they think the benefit, what they see as benefits, and they've assigned point values to that. And they have to meet, I think they have a 70% threshold. I can't remember exactly. And they have way more categories than us. And we went through, the council and staff went through category by category, what we agreed was beneficial to Corcoran. And we removed the ones that didn't make sense. And then we've made up some new categories along the way. But the idea being that this not only provides standards for council to hold up to, it provides guidance for staff as we negotiate with developers, because we're the first point of discussion, or first point of contact with developers. We're discussing these things long before council gets involved because of a review deadline that's state law. So it's helpful to have this in one spot where we can point to, well, this is what we agreed is a benefit as a community. So the fact that you're building a road, we don't see that as a benefit. And so anyway, that's where we're at.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment on that if I could, because, you know, my time on the commission has been relatively short, but in my time on the commission, we've now reviewed 2 PUDs. And my sense of that process was that something needed to be done to better clarify that process, just because the debate was the city's going to give up some things, but we're going to get something in return. And the debate was, are we getting enough in return to justify the things we're giving up? And that was always a point of contention. And I thought when this proposal came about, that this was a way to be able to say, these are the things that are important to Corcoran. Developer, if you can meet and exceed some of these requirements, it justifies us considering a PUD, and it takes away some of that debate and discussion about, are they really giving up? Are they giving us enough things to give up on some things that we maybe would want to see? So my perspective would be, I would wholeheartedly support doing something, because my experience with the 2 that we've done, I felt like the system was broken a little bit, and this would be a way to rectify that. Relative to the point system thing, I mean, I'm more of a quantitative guy than I'm a qualitative guy, and so I like the point system. I certainly understand Chair Lantern's concern that, you know, legally, is this something that could be challenged? But I guess as long as the city attorney has reviewed it and to state that, you know, the 75% threshold allows a proposal to move forward, but doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to get approval. And we can stand by that. I guess I would be more in support of the point system, just because if I'm the developer coming in, it helps me understand what's important, helps me understand what I need to do to meet that threshold versus a qualitative, which is just a little fuzzy. And I guess that's, so my perspective would be more points than qualitative, as long as we're comfortable from a legal perspective, we can back that if they meet the 75%, and then council decides not to approve PUD.
And along those lines, we have used Maple Grove as an example. Well, Maple Grove has had some development, you know, that started in the 80s. And clearly at that time, they were using a point system. So do we know how long they have been using the point system and when they adopted it? Like at what point in their development?
I know the current planner was there when they wrote it. So
I mean, you can, I won't
don't know
hold
how long
you
they've
to a
had it.
specific, like 5 years.
I think it's longer than 5 years.
Longer than 5 years.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but it's been like, it's been a career of like one planner that's been, and he's one I grew up with, so he's been involved with it from the beginning. So it's been the span of his career, maybe a little, like maybe a little less than his career, but So I wouldn't say, I definitely say not 1980s, probably not 1990s, but sometime in the 2000s, I want to say.
Do you know from the data one?
I don't believe they have a point system, not to my knowledge of. Yeah, yeah, I'm only aware of Maple Grove that. Okay.
Somewhat.
I was thinking of a hybrid. Was that discussed as far as like, point system, but it's not a way to get a little bit of an objective measure. Instead of saying, we're gonna build a road, we're gonna create a tax base, it actually would still have points, like you would score it the same way we're planning. But it's not a requirement, but it's it's a supporting information versus here's some standards. And hopefully you can do some of those, be really nice, we really like that, but instead we're actually still scoring it the same exact way. But there's no,
Threshold.
it's not a threshold to get here, but they come in and now they've got to wait. Because you're saying not weighted, but I'm like, actually, it is a weight, it's weighting your, it's adding to your case, to your PUD. And we start saying, wow, you have a lot of points here. So this is probably a good benefit to me as a, or us as a city.
So the point system would stay the threshold would go away.
Yes, that was what I was thinking. So, because I love the idea of like going down their list and they go, oh, cool, if we could show them that we're hitting these things. Maybe it's not the 75%, but it ends up being 65%, and if that's okay, that might still be really good. Right? We might say, oh, you know, it would allow us to see it. We can still see what kind of value how would we measure the value? That's what I was thinking. So, but it's not I don't think it can be challenged legally, it's just really for us to use, us and city council to use in making a decision.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I'll add to that idea. I'm not, staff is not opposed. The ones that were formulaic that I really liked because they were objective, because it's how many houses are within a 1/4 mile, became much more difficult when we switched to the qualitative analysis. So I wouldn't be opposed to a hybrid approach if that's the recommendation from the planning commission. We could definitely-
Thoughts on something like that?
Right.
Well, I think the concern, obviously after initially hearing like the suggestion of a hybrid, is that you're still really operating under a threshold, you're just not communicating the threshold. Because there's still something that's going to have to be there is something that's going to have to indicate green light, your application can go through. And so,
I don't, and what do we do today? I mean, what do we do today to say green light goes through?
So even if we did the qualitative approach, there's 27 categories. So even if we didn't have like 10 points, 30 points, 5 points, you would make that they're meeting 8 out of the 27 categories, or they're meeting 8 out of 15 categories that apply to the site. You still
have to create. something
yeah,
like a threshold.
so maybe it does, not that there's a threshold, just like that's the information that would be forwarded. That would be part of the analysis of like what categories they're hitting, what categories are they close to hitting, or the changes that could be, things like that. And so if you wanted something weighted so that, visual termini isn't considered, which is right now 5 points in the point system, isn't considered the same weight, or almost the same weight.
Yeah, it's a level
as
difference.
another- Yeah, exactly. So there, I could see pros and cons. So I'll let Kendra
Can I
speak.
ask a question? I just want to ask a question because it's something we hadn't talked about.
Mhm.
So the point of the point system is they don't even get to planning commission
Right.
unless they have 75 points.
Well, they would get the planning commission to be a recommendation of denial from staff. And so it'd probably be a lot less of a discussion and probably be like, yep, we agree with staff. And we're done. So it would have to still go through the denial process and an application.
Okay, so you can get there under the point system even if you don't need it. So if you took away the points, there's nothing that staff is holding you back. I read it like staff isn't sending it forward if you don't get.
I don't
75
think
points.
legally we cannot send it forward. Maple Grove says that they don't send it forward, usually at the request of the developer until they hit the point, knowing that it's not going to get through without hitting the threshold.
So then my question just becomes, if it's a tool for staff on the back end, prior to any application making it to this point, in terms of saying, like, I can sort of point you to this document, you do the work to make sure you're hitting this, rather than us having to talk about each little point as a benefit. If that is removed and it goes the qualitative direction, option 2, how does that change the staff's back end work? You know what I'm saying? Or am I not being very clear?
I don't think it would change the work which we went with option 1 or option 2. So then I have to sit through and see what applies and measure that. it was going to change, or some of the exhibits I'm going to need from developers, so that I'm not necessarily making some of the stuff up from the get-go, like they should be providing me with, like, I'm gonna have to verify it, but they should be
Okay.
providing me exhibit showing how many homes are within 1/4 mile, if that's the benefit that they want to show. They're going to have to provide a bit more documentation. But either way, I'm going to have to sit down. Might just be a matter of, for some of the ones that weren't as formulaic, sitting down and being like, the skill that Maple Grove uses and that I would intend to use is it true? Is it somewhat true? Is it not true? Is it not true? And so basically it's all points, half point, 0. And so that would be taken away if we don't have any points involved, and it's just, did you hit it or not? So, yeah, that's about what I can proceed.
And one of the challenges of qualitative is it levels the playing field across all 27 categories. And we spent a fair amount of time talking about what the priorities should be, what's more important, what's less important. So that would be one of the challenges of the qualitative is just, it's 27 categories and they're all basically considered the same.
What I'm hearing is that it is just as valuable for staff and council as it is for developers and, any other applicant. These set of criteria or categories. Okay. I don't quote me on the word, but if they were in a sense guiding principles, there were no numbers. I think it would be up to the council to take them seriously for them to be effective, right? So if I tend to lean towards no point system, use them as guiding principles given the growth of the city and where it is right now. Because things are changing so fast and we're defining at the moment, right? We're defined, but we're growing and learning. And these applications, I feel like are very valuable in learning all the time. Just my opinion. So I guess if we went no point system, which is where I live, it would need to, for it to be valuable, it would need to be taken seriously as a council guidepost. And it could be leveraged for helping developer applicants as guiding principles. Sure, this is what we value, but then to your point, what the weighted system that maybe was already determined in the working session would need to be what council considers behind their desk. And I don't,
Yeah, but it would have this, I don't know if the weighting would be there because some of the items there's formulaic within the particular item, so it gets more points if you're further, if you've accomplished, some of the elements, but I can't remember some of them more like that, but it's like, you can get more points if you do these other things for the same category, and in this, if we get rid of the points, then I can do the minimum, and I get essentially full credit for meeting that goal, I guess. That's all. That's why it seems like the points, like you said, we put a lot of work into. This one's more important, so we want to get more points. If we want more open space or more trees or more something, that is more important than having some green space in a parking lot or something, right? Randomly thinking, I'm making new categories right now. Yeah, and that's where I just think the points are good, but I get what you're saying on the legal stuff and the threshold and things like that. It's just, to me, maybe if we still kept the points and you score them, so now they have a score, not just they met 6 out of 8 categories or whatever. Comes to council and they see, well, this is kind of in this good range versus the better range versus the best range or something where it's this is a very strong public benefit. If I'm a developer, I might want to hit a couple extra things to get a few extra points to kind of show that I'm giving something that's very strong benefit. I don't know. I don't know what the negative of doing that is. I can't see the negative of using the points that we developed.
I think it does become a little bit restrictive.
How so?
In the sense that, it removes the ability to have just some discretion. And because I know that we say, that you can be innovative and come up with your own, but it also ties it to specific categories, right? So in a sense, then and not that that's bad, right? And I'm not saying I'm not for the point system or whatever, that I think this is a great discussion, but I can see how in practice, in theory, it seems like it's going to, allow for lots of different options that I can also see how in use, it could be actually restricted. But
Well, if I could just kind of reiterate, and I apologize up front if I sound like a broken record here, but you know, I really think that there should be no points. And in this context, I think that point awards, especially those that say maximum or case by case, is just too subjective. And coupled with that, these points will be awarded by staff. And I think reasonable minds can disagree with that award. And for that reason, I think calling this a guiding document that could be modified and updated when needed is better for everyone, including the city council, and for developers. I think that this will make it easier to identify and will, in fairness to applicants, not have them rely on checking a bunch of boxes.
Oh, sorry, I guess I was assuming it's still guiding, a guiding document, but with weighted points that they would understand. That I was still assuming it was not a code thing, the way I'm talking about. So maybe it's like, I'm thinking of option 2+ or something, it's like 2, but with the points in it, but the points are there for guide, that's a guide, that's it. That's all.
Well, I don't know that the points are there for a guide. I think that if you hit the points, then you check the boxes. And,
Sure.
and I would challenge, because, you know, you mark my words, if we go down the path of these points, the first time city council denies one of these, there's going to be a lawsuit. And, you know, with all due respect to the city attorney, you know, people sue for less. And whereas I think if this is a guidance, this is a goodwill exercise with the city to share expectations with developers. And I think that it will go a long way of building trust between the city and with developers. Because I'll tell you, if I'm a developer and I start checking these boxes and I'm spending money to check these boxes, okay, this stuff isn't free. And I'm checking these boxes and I'm all excited because, you know, I got all the points and then city council is going to deny me. That's not going to happen. And if it does, it'll be a bad turnout for everyone, in my opinion.
Yeah, and maybe I'd ask this question for discussion, because I wasn't part of the working group. But, you know, the point system versus the guiding principle, I would ask, what does the point system solve? If it was something like, hey, we're getting too many applications and a bunch of them don't meet our threshold and they're a waste of our time. The point system gets us, you know, we're prioritizing, then that's solving for it, right? But what does the point system solve for us versus being a guiding principle?
it quantifies objectives, I think, and
It identifies a commitment to the developer to do some of the things the city feels is important. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get approved, but at least it shows the developer that looked at what's important to the city of Corcoran and has done enough changes to meet the threshold that was established.
so I do also, for as much as I think that sometimes the point system could potentially be restrictive, I also do like the qualitative nature of it, quantitative, excuse me, not qualitative. So my question is, if we were to consider for a moment the hybrid option, is it possible to go with, I'm trying to imagine two scenarios so that we can move to the resolution. So if we were to say, okay, we like option one weighted, can we remove the threshold but still leave the weighted category? Potentially, but then we're still, the problem with that is that we still are actually in practice operating with some kind of like a threshold.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
I apologize. So what I'm seeing as the downside of removing the threshold but keeping the point, it's like the benefit and the downside at the same time. The benefit is you have clear guidance as to what categories mean more than others. The downside is council has less discretion in saying, well, but we don't like that open space. We don't want to give the 30 points that it qualifies for, or whatever the benefit is. And we don't like the greenway corridors that you're proposing. So although we should give it 30 points according to our policy document, where we feel like we have to give it, even though we really don't want to. So I think that's kind of the pull. When you establish standards, you lose discretion. It's essentially, there's really no way around it. So if it's, what is the goal? If the goal is to develop review standards that kind of tie everyone's hands involved, then the points will work. If the goal is to keep discretion, then my option 2 might be better. I think that there might be some room for points. I can totally see how that'd be still beneficial. And we remove the threshold language, and it's not really about meeting a certain amount of points. And so it still gives council some discretion, like, well, you did this, but we didn't, you're still not out of points because of the value of the items that you're meeting. I'd have to speak with the city attorney. This wasn't something discussed, but if that is the recommendation by a planning commission, we could certainly forward that. And then I can work with that with the city attorney. But yeah, so it's just the downside. You can't have standards and have discretion.
And so to clarify, when you suggest option, like, or when you say option 2, can it still be included, for lack of the point system, can it still be communicated somehow for you to point developers to that these are the categories that are most important that our city has determined are more important than, that you can walk to a gazebo within a quarter mile of your house, or that a silo was.
Yeah, like maybe
right?
there's like a high, a medium, and a low
Is
priority.
there some way to integrate that? And I know you said that potentially that would be where you'd have to talk to the.
I
city
think
attorney.
that might be a better approach, would be a high, medium, low. Again, I'd have to speak with the city attorney, but I think that could make some sense. And so that in, the ones that have 30 points option that have been deemed more important, but then the council might still have that discretion in saying, yeah, you're proposing this, but it really isn't meeting the intent that we have for it.
And what that would also allow for is potentially a greater award, like when you remove the points, then even though you've maxed something at 25, but you see it coming in, oh my gosh, it looks fantastic. Why would we not move forward with it?
Yeah.
We can say we actually attach a greater value to this
Then we thought we would.
category.
Exactly, and that was one of the problems I ran into when we removed things from 50 to 30, especially with the formulaic ones. It stops incentivizing like more homes being closer to the park after certain points because you've maxed out at 30 points. So there's no benefit to the developer to include more in terms of. So I think that would be true, that it would allow for some discretion in how things are weighed with the council. Maybe a little less discretion, but there probably wouldn't be able to approve something that is the only public benefit is the visual termini. That one's like 5 points right now, and so that would definitely be in the low category. But I think that if one public benefit that they're offering is so fantastic, again, it's hard to imagine what that would be at this point, but maybe it's 1 or 3 public benefits that are really making it a strong proposal, then it doesn't necessarily matter if they're not getting the rest of them, and the council would have that discretion. So I think, but go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Natalie, isn't option 2 the status quo on steroids in the sense
Right.
that today, when somebody comes in for a PUD at a preliminary before concept, you say to them, this is what's important to the council. Tree preservation is really important. We've identified these natural resources. And so we do that based on the comp plan. So wouldn't you use this guiding document in the same way with more specificity?
Definitely.
And so then it becomes a benefit, like it isn't for naught, because it does, because that's my thinking is it sounds kind of similar to our PUD process right now, but it isn't because it gives you more meat as staff, more meat.
And it's more to just saying, oh, we want natural resources, or
It's being specific.
yeah, we have like some specific, we have each category defined as to what we're hoping to see. again, it's a little more difficult with the ones that had a formula, but I feel like didn't set a specific threshold for them, but that you expect that it should be something around 20% of the homes should be, at least 20% of the homes should be around a focal point for the neighborhood to satisfy this category. And then to your point, city council, if it is 50% of the homes that have some kind of identical category that are identifiable focal point, we look at this 20% was really the bare minimum, and so 50% might further that argument that it's a public benefit that may have more weight than they would have given it to it previously, if that makes sense. So
An option two, as you said, and we add more meat. I guess my question would be, after all the hard work that's been put in, does that add enough meat to make the process worthwhile?
again, it depends on what the goal is with the city. If we want standards and we want hard standards, then we want.
Personally, I would hold the discretion piece, because that's ultimately what a PUD is for. And my opinion is for flexibility, is for discretion. If we just wanted standards, we would develop according to city standards.
Well, I'd like to make a motion to recommend option 2, which incorporates guidelines for PUDs, but does not make them a point requirement for getting in front of council. And specifically provide that the guidance may be amended from time to time. Can I get a second?
I would second that.
All in
Okay, sorry,
favor?
just want to make sure I understand. So you're saying you're basically recommending option 2.
I'm recommending
With.
option 2 with, and I will have a recommendation to specifically state in the code that this may be updated from time to time so that we can give a kind of like a forewarning to developers that this will be changed over time as the needs of the city changes. I just think just for
This is similar
clarity,
to our southeast and northeast design. That's what
Right.
those are.
so, and I'm sorry, did I have a second?
Yes.
I did that.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Mr. Chair, real quick, I just want the other questions that I had, just so that I can put in the staff report, we don't need to make a formal motion. But discretion to use open space for recreational, were you all on board with that?
I'm sorry.
Just the ability to use the open space as some recreational space.
Yes, I think discretion, right? Like, so when it gets done.
Discretion, yes.
The ability for the council to waive or reduce the open space requirement as they see fit, okay? And then there was one.
I
more.
did have a question on the public. I didn't get down to the note yet, but I have a question on the public accessibility, where it says PUDs that include natural features like creeks must provide public access to these features. I was thinking about something like Rush Creek, which is like my backyard. I'm like, I don't know. I'm just curious, like, what would public access look like for a creek that most of the time has like half a foot of water, 6 inches of water, like,
Fair enough. Rush Creek Reserve, like some of the.
well, that just goes throughout
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah, not Rush Creek Reserve, but yeah, I think for that PUD.
I mean, it's a creek, it's a creek, it's like, is that would we be like, oh, you need public access to that, to stand there and look at some dirty water?
I could put some better definition of what we mean by creek, so that we're not looking at a ditch that's qualified.
Well, it's the creek that runs, I mean, it goes from, I don't know,
The
20,
idea,
50 miles or something, you know, but it's the, I mean, in the summer, it's yay deep and yay wide, and, you know, it's nothing, it's like public access to that. It just was in my head, I'm like, that would be very weird, like,
So this was language taken from a different city. I did not make that one
I
up.
imagine a lake, though, maybe a river, there'd be something cool.
Yeah, and so I believe it was a category for Maple Grove, so it was a category. This was,
Okay.
but this was identified as the council, something we just wanted to be, if there is a natural feature on there such as a lake, for example, Cook Lake, we want.
Yeah,
public
what
access
makes
to be
sense.
provided, that should just be a given.
Yeah.
But to your point, maybe creek should be better defined, so we're not talking about something that's not always.
Well,
creek.
Rush Creek is a protected waterway
Okay.
Yeah.
under the state
Okay.
rules. So I think even though at times it's very low, the idea of providing trail access that meanders next to the creek is, I think, what the council probably.
Oh, okay.
I think
Just
about
curious,
not
that was a
necessarily
bad-
being able to throw a canoe in it. or anything. But,
Yeah, well, that it was flooded, totally flooded here.
Yeah.
Okay, I was curious about that.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
So, I'm also curious to see how everyone thinks they should be amended in addition to these comments. I think that references to points need to be removed. Other than that, is there anything else? Are there additional categories that should be added, or should categories be removed?
Can we discuss that even though we took a formal vote? Can we still?
Well, I think we're still
All right, we're gonna.
Get your
loosely-
comments on
loosely
now,
hold
yeah.
it. Okay, well,
fine tuning.
so I do know, because we did provide feedback, and so clearly anything that was brought up has already been discussed with council because those ideas were presented. So I don't want to rehash anything that doesn't need to be rehashed, but I am curious, because when we talk about design standards, one of the ways in which they become feasible is they get built into the cost of the home when it goes to a seller. And that just is part of the way that it is. So one of the categories that I had proposed was in exchange for affordable housing, like a percentage of fees that were going affordable housing, some kind of an approach so that there was access to these neighborhoods by a variety of homeowners. And it didn't make the cut, so I'm sure it wasn't discussed, but I'm curious, was it a legal standpoint, like, hey, that's just really something that can't be done? Or was it like, yeah, we're just not so interested in doing that?
So affordable housing usually requires some buy-in from the city for it to be something that a developer can do, and we just don't have those programs set up.
Okay.
So I think legally we could do it. We just don't really have the mechanics around it, and we don't have the desire to create those mechanics.
Sure. Because I do know that state legislation is trying to propose changes to those density, minimum densities in order to accommodate some of the affordable housing. And I would rather see us develop programs so that we can maintain these really high standard neighborhoods and make them accessible, rather than change our minimum density standards across the whole city in order to make affordable housing accessible. So I just wanted to make that comment.
So, and I just have one final point, and I'm looking for guidance. I think that we can recommend striking, quote, collaboration with other landowners, since it is now incorporated as a requirement in the code anyway.
Just to clarify, Mr. Chair, the neighborhood meeting, hosting a neighborhood meeting is a requirement of the code. The collaboration means that they're having some give and take and discussion, ongoing discussion with them, because it's a little different.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, thank you.
And related to the neighborhood meeting, because I was just at that last council meeting was interesting where whichever it was, Cook or whatever, they came in with an amendment and the neighbors were pretty upset because there was a lot of, discussion apparently in advance, and they negotiated and got to an agreement, essentially the neighbors were like, okay, we're okay if they do this, and then they came in and they want to turn them to rentals and then lower the age and go from 100 units, basically 150 units. And they were like, whoa, those were all things we kind of talked about. We got to an agreement and then it allowed to move forward, and now you're coming in with an amendment. I wasn't sure if this neighborhood meeting doesn't really mention, I don't know if it gets logged officially as far as like, what were the items discussed, and if they make agreements, kind of concessions, that it's kind of collaborating, that it doesn't come back later. Okay, you collaborated, great, and then comes back later with an amendment that actually removes this, all the collaboration that occurred. That makes sense what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
So, it does make sense to provide me with proof that I would need exactly that from them. I would need if they're going for, as a public benefit, that they've collaborated with the neighborhood. I would need them to provide me with a minute if I wasn't at the meeting. So we don't have a lot of meeting space in Corcoran.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
a lot of neighborhood meetings are probably gonna be held here, which means I will be here. So, because I have to open the door for them. So, but the ones that don't get held here, I would need some kind of recapture, whether that's.
Yeah, 'cause there was an
recording
agreement that
or
was made,
minute,
like,
So that I can, so that I can see like, okay, yes, they did change their plans here to try to incorporate this feedback, and not all feedback can be accommodated.
Yeah,
So we're
but
not
if they
saying-
come back with
but-
an amendment,
So it's something they
8
haven't
months later,
incorporated,
and
yeah.
there's kind of a matchup to go, oh, hold on a second.
Yeah.
You're changing something that was. one
Yeah,
of
that
the
would
agreements.
have to be clearly documented, and I think to qualify for that category, we would need that, yeah.
All right, so kind of keeping things rolling here, I see that the next item on the agenda is planning commission training. However, I want to be mindful of Councilman Schultz's time unless you would like to participate in our training. I guess I was going to suggest if we could, and I know I'm a little late on this, but I guess just in consideration of the councilman's time, could we move commissioner questions? Or excuse me, can we move our time with the liaison up to now? And then we can do training after that? Would you like to do that? Okay, all right. Well, then, Natalie, you have the floor for training.
All right, we're all feeling good where we left, okay, awesome. So,
And good discussion. Thank you, everyone.
oh, yeah. That would help.
And thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I hope I see you next month. You're welcome here anytime, sir.
Well, I'm engaging on something, so I gotta bounce around a little bit.
Oh.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too, sir.
So tonight, I just want to take this as an opportunity to review some basic concepts, since we have one very new commissioner, and Commissioner Horn has only been with us for a couple meetings as well. Also want to take this as an opportunity to review just chapters 1 and 2 of the 2040 comprehensive plan. And then one of the priorities the commission had identified for this year was to get a better understanding of homeowners associations and the role they have, limitations we have as a city regarding them. So want to get that one checked off our list. Just for starters, why do we plan? The planning process is a way to evaluate a community's history, where we're currently at, and then provide a vision for the future. The idea is you want to promote good outcomes while preventing poor outcomes. And want to protect community character resources, drive investments in economic development, provide cost-effective delivery of services and infrastructure, participate in cooperation with other government agencies, and then balance community interests with private property rights and other private rights. In Minnesota, the city has the ability to plan through the Minnesota Municipal Planning Act. It's a delegation of the state's police power. And specifically, this act provides the framework and authority for Minnesota cities to regulate land uses and encourage orderly development through tools, comprehensive plan, our zoning ordinance, and subdivision ordinance. These are our guiding documents. So the enabling legislation requires planning to begin with an analysis of our community needs and goals, which formulates our comprehensive plan. And then the comprehensive plan is looks to the future and guides our community development and informs our zoning ordinance and subdivision ordinance. Those two tools, the zoning ordinance and subdivision ordinance, implement the comprehensive plan. So they definitely have a relationship with each other and are supposed to complement. As the one thing to just keep in mind, any regulation must be a reasonable means to meet legal ends for the city's interest. So for the zoning ordinance, this regulates private property by establishing standards for development on individual lots, such as the use of lands and the like bulk and area regulations, so setbacks, heights, impervious surface coverage limits. It works in conjunction with our zoning map, and I have a picture of that later in the presentation. And there are different classes of uses that are identified for each district. We specifically have allowed uses. These are uses that no questions asked, conditions cannot be applied. You have a right to do this with your property. We have accessory uses, which are can be allowed accessory uses, but they need to be exist in connection with a principal use. So you can't have an accessory structure such as a shed in Corcoran without a principal dwelling, principal structure on the property. Then you have conditional uses. These are allowed uses. They are uses that have been contemplated within the district, but because of the use, there may be additional stipulations needed to ensure that it fits within a specific area. So a lot of conditional use permits that we have outlined in our city, we have standards for that conditional use permit specific, and then we also have general standards for all conditional use permits. Ones that we see a lot are for accessory structures to exceed the sidewall height limit. That one is probably the most common CUP I've run across in the last couple of years. But we also have CUPs for schools and assembly uses within a lot of our residential districts, just because those can be a more intense use, and you want to make sure that they fit within the area of the code. There's also interim uses, which are very similar to conditional uses, but there's a sunset clause attached to it. So they're only approved for a certain amount of time. There's some trigger point where it will fade away. The conditional use permit is forever as long as they're meeting all the conditions of approval. Finally, we have some uses that are approved by administrative permit within our code. We recently did this with our accessory dwelling unit. So essentially saying it is an allowed use if it meets these standards we've outlined, and instead of making them go through a formal process, knowing that we're going to approve those ADUs that can meet those standards, then we just have them do the administrative permit process. So there is still some review to make sure the standards are met, and there is still a process to make sure conditions are satisfied. Yeah. Oh, I added in the top. Okay, so subdivision ordinance, this is what is our policy that establishes the procedure for land division. So it ensures new development and redevelopment meet standards for a safe, functional, and enjoyable community. The subdivision ordinance regulates the division of land into smaller lots within blocks and neighborhoods, and also has design standards for streets, environmental features, and it typically results in a plat, although we do have some other subdivision options that aren't done in a formal plat. We call it minor subdivision, lot line consolidation. So there are some other options where it wouldn't necessarily go in front of the planning commission if they aren't requesting a variance. But ultimately it's the guiding document that tells us what standards a parcel needs to meet in order to be able to further subdivide. So the role of planning staff as we continue to work together, it is staff and consultants, it is our job to interpret and administer land use regulations as it's written in city code. So we are very limited to what is written. There may be some wiggle room for interpretation when things aren't very clear. But ultimately, we try to go to the letter of the law unless it's something that needs to go to council, and that's where a lot of policy questions get transferred to. Then we review and coordinate review of land use applications. It's my job to work with public works, public safety, to make sure that they are aware of land use applications coming in. And we meet with developers, property owners, and residents to answer their questions. We prepare staff reports to inform and advise you and city council, and we do the research of planning and land use issues. I work on the long range plan, such as the comprehensive plan and special projects, such as we did with the Northeast District Plan. We maintain the city records, provide continuity and institutional knowledge, educate and assist the public. And this is left over from my presentation last year, where the voice of planning at City Hall. So the role of the planning commission, you all were created based on the presumption that residents should be heavily involved in the review process for the community and make recommendations on land use applications and regulations. Mostly, you will make quasi judicial recommendations to council, and this means you're interpreting and applying the ordinance as written. You will still make some legislative recommendations to council, such as what we did tonight with the zoning ordinance amendment for planned unit development. And if we ever had like a comprehensive plan amendment, that would be a legislative choice, because those are documents where we have the most discretion. I'll get into that in a second. And then the planning commissioner, I think I already said that, basically you also have a role in interpreting and applying the written codes and ordinances that we have established. Oh, that's right. Sorry. Types of applications that are within your purview. So there are several types of land use applications. The ones that will come in front of you are comprehensive plan amendments, rezoning, zoning or subdivision ordinance amendments, preliminary plat, preliminary planned unit development plans, conditional use permits, interim use permits, variances, and site plans. The commission will also be heavily involved in the comprehensive plan process when we have to update that in about 5 years, if not sooner. So you will be a part of creating the framework for the next 20 years. And there are applications that are only reviewed by staff, such as building permits, minor amendments to previously approved plans, and administrative permits. And the council applications only reviewed by the council are sketch plans, final plat, final PUDs, major PUD amendments, and minor subdivisions, lot line adjustments. This is the pyramid of discretion. I really like this graphic. It's helpful for even someone who was new to planning, staff-wise. So the bottom, this green, is where the city has the most discretion in decision making. And this is the legislative authority. So this is our comprehensive plan. This is our zoning and subdivision ordinances. We have a lot of say in how we frame these guiding documents. While there are still some legal boundaries, these are where we have the most ability to shape our community the way that we want to. And then once those are established, you'll receive applications such as subdivision applications, conditional or interim use permits, and variances. I don't really agree with the yellow. So yellow is supposed to say there's some aggression, or sorry, aggression.
Sometimes.
There's a lot of aggression.
Spontaneous utterance.
So I apologize. I would say variances are more green. You have no obligation to approve a variance. You can require them to follow the letter of the law. So I don't really agree with that yellow, but
You're not creating, green is creating law, that's why it's green.
Okay.
You could maybe flip it and put it on the bottom, but the difference is green is where you're creating the rules, yellow and red, you're just applying the rules.
Okay.
That's the reason, but yeah, it seems backwards, that very.
yeah.
Discretion.
So these are our quasi judicial decisions that is again applying the law that's written. And then we have the least amount of wiggle room with the red. So these are our building permits. These are our site plan reviews. If they meet the standards that we have outlined. And administrative permits will also be up there. If they meet the standards, they should be approved. There really shouldn't be additional conditions attached. It should just be rubber stamp essentially.
Get colored below the state, county.
Fair enough. Okay, so I'm gonna try to quickly go through these. I just wanted to provide our newer commissioners with a bit of a background on some of the applications you'll see. Comprehensive plan. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, can I ask you a
Yeah.
question? You know, I think we can all agree that Corcoran is often referred to as rural. But I did hear that, hear you say earlier that the guidance that the Met Council has given us is 3 to 5 units per acre, which doesn't sound rural to me.
I am going to get.
So my question for you is, why do we give a crap what the Met Council has to say? Because they have no enforcement power if we don't follow their guidance. And I just think it's more important for us to listen to the desires of our citizens than it is to listen to the desires of a bunch of people who have never even been in this town.
I hear you, I do, and it's not the first time I've heard this. So the Metropolitan Council, basically the Metropolitan Urban Service Area, that was something that was decided by the city leadership 20 years ago. Okay. We got to
So-
identify where it went.
So under state law, the Met Council has authority to establish the urban service area. And as such, identifies the fair share of urban development that communities have to plan for. And Lake Elmo did test this a number of years ago, where they said that we don't care what you say, we're not doing that. And the end result is you do have to plan for that kind of growth based on your community designation. And it is a challenge for communities, but that would be end result. So state law gives them the right to do that, and then we're required to comply with those designations of. And so a portion of the city is emerging suburban, and
Going to my.
a portion is rural. So there's only a portion that they do have any ability to say anything on, but in that portion within the MUSA.
But you would agree that they have no enforcement authority.
I would recommend that you contact your state representative with a proposal to make a change in the legislation at the state level for reform. There was one that was put forth this last legislative session by a representative in Egan. It was to just change the qualifications in order to be nominated, and then the time period in which folks were nominated, because again, it's an appointed position. But I think ultimately, as frustrated as we are, potentially as city residents, that is the method that needs to be pursued, rather than just kind of bucking the system at this point in time.
Yeah, my understanding is it takes a lot, to challenge the Met Council is gonna take a lot of staff time, and it's gonna take a lot of city resources, and so while there might not be a clear enforcement, it would make things very difficult. And if the desire of the city council to have staff challenge the Met Council, it will likely lead to legal proceedings that will take a lot of time.
So then we just give the bully our milk money. And
No, you're-
they take it
Without
over.
our own sewer system.
What's that?
That would be
Yeah.
that would be your remedy.
What about well and septic?
We don't get
Work at
water
night.
from that council.
What, I'm sorry.
We don't get our water from the Met
Okay,
Council.
so just sewer.
I feel like I heard at a council meeting. Why are we in the MUSA?
So what I would say to that, just to keep the training moving. that,
I'm
in-
sorry
in
to
20
derail.
In 2015, the Met Council is gonna provide the system statement.
2025.
Or did I say 15?
Yeah.
That's because I'm still 27, 20. In 2025, the Met Council, 2 years, is gonna provide a system statement that's gonna say, Corcoran, you need to take this amount of growth. And that's really the council's opportunity to challenge that. And there's a lot of policy issues, for example, as homeowners, landowners who may be making decisions on the idea of selling their land in the MUSA, taking them out of the MUSA may not be met with warm feelings. So, but that's really the time to, I think, debate that whether we should be in the MUSA or not.
And that's in 2025?
That's when they release the system statement, and so the city then has an opportunity to say, we disagree with your growth estimate.
That's an election year, isn't it,
For.
for city council? So,
So anyway, I think we can come
Yeah.
circle back to this, but for the purposes of Natalie's presentation, we are in the mute though.
sorry.
And have some responsibility under the comp plan.
But also,
only
let
agree
me
to
just
talk
say,
about
the
the
twenty
contract
twenty-five thing only addresses our city, and we are residents of an entire state. So I would just again challenge you that if it is something you care deeply about, it is something that could be proposed as statewide legislation. You have time to put that on.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm more focused on Corcoran. Let the rest fend for themselves.
Anyway, okay, so comprehensive plan amendments, so essentially, what you typically see is an amendment request to the land use guiding, and I'll show that map here in a little bit. But it could also be, like, we have a staging plan, which I will also show you, which says, which properties are expected to have municipal services and when over the next 20 years. So there could be a comprehensive plan amendment to the staging document if someone wants to get moved up to have those services accessible.
By services, does that include police and fire?
It, I don't believe this document has the police and fire, but I think it's more transportation.
Well, anytime you look at a comp plan amendment, that is one of the items that we say is the impact on public services, including police and fire.
Specific chapter on it.
Yeah, we just don't have a chapter in the comprehensive plan, but when we do a comp plan amendment, we do think about that. That's a tricky one because it's a policy, it's not as measurable as the sewer and water, but it is something in the review.
But yeah, so typically what I think, knowing what's coming your way, you will, I see a comprehensive plan amendment. What they're looking to do is re-guide a property from industrial to commercial. And so they can't just rezone it from industrial to commercial because the underlying land use needs to match. And so you'll want to, when you're reviewing that, you'll want to consider the consistency of their request with the goals and objectives of our overall comprehensive plan. And the impacts on public facilities, as just discussed, potential for resulting development to create an undue impact on adjacent properties, and whether development should fit, that proposed development would fit the physical character of the neighborhood or improve viability. So we will talk about that more when the application is presented. Zoning ordinance amendments are very similar. We have map amendments that change district boundaries. And then we have text amendments that change our land use regulations. And so I processed several of these and they've come in front of you. We had a zoning ordinance amendment about fences recently. These are our legislative decisions and must be consistent with the comprehensive planning. It needs to, it can't be incompatible with the underlying designations of the comprehensive plan or the goal. And it should not have a detrimental impact to neighborhoods in the community as a whole. It should not have a detrimental impact to natural environment or the city's ability to provide efficient services. Rezoning is very similar to the zoning ordinance amendment, but this is typically a request specifically to take the zoning from a specific parcel or group of parcels and change it to something else. So with our planned unit development application, since that is a district in our code, that is, they have to also request a rezoning in addition to the rest of their application, because we're looking at rezoning it from whatever it currently is to a PUD. And again, the application that is coming either next month or the month after, they will have to, in addition to the comp plan amendment, rezone it from industrial to a commercial district. If the requested zoning is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, so we have some districts like our low density residential areas, and then you said we have 3 different districts. So there, it could be that they want to rezone from RSF1 to RSF3, which allows for twin homes and smaller lots. So you could still rezone without having to have a comp plan amendment. It's when you're going from an incompatible land use designation to another, that you need to do the comprehensive plan amendment for the underlying document. So if it is inconsistent, it should be denied, or they should have to do a comprehensive plan amendment on top of it. Unless they're, I'm sorry, so then one thing to keep in mind with rezoning is spot zoning should be avoided. This is when you're zoning a single piece of property out of context with its surroundings. So you're in the middle of a single family neighborhood and right in the middle you put a gas station. That typically could be considered spot zoning. However, there are areas where neighborhood commercial can be appropriate at the intersection of two major roads. So it's a little complicated to wrap your head around, but the idea is if it's really local streets, these are not major roadways, and you put an industrial user in the middle of a residential neighborhood, that would be spot zoning and would be problematic.
But didn't we just do that by approving a 500,000 square foot warehouse in a residential neighborhood?
Yeah, and neither one of them was, yeah, both PUD.
That was zoned industrial, or was it changed to be zoned industrial?
They were both underlying industrial and they were part of a larger industrial zone. So if it was in the middle of smack dab in the rural residential, and then you put an industrial building in it, that would be more like spot
On the
zoning.
border.
But yeah, if it's part of a district that's already.
So if houses are across the street, that's one thing, but if it's like plunked down in the middle of the residential zone, then that's what you're calling spot zone.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
All right,
Yep.
Thanks.
So it's hard to wrap your head around. I've had to. There's been times where, but that's spot zoning. Why is that okay? I don't get it. So it's there, but there are times you're supposed to avoid it. And specifically in Minnesota, and we're not the only state, it's technically illegal to do. So it's one of those things, I guess, to recognize it when you see it. Next slide. So you'll also see preliminary plat. The preliminary plats have an automatic 120-day review process, which is going to differ from some of our other applications, which need to be processed typically within 60 days, unless the city asks for an extension, and we can only do that with one. So that's called the 60-day rule. But plat, we automatically get 120 days to make sure that we have time to review it properly. Plat approval can only be conditioned on compliance with items contained in our adopted comprehensive plan, local ordinances, and official maps in place at the time of submittal. So if we were to change something and we already had a complete application submitted, we can't apply the new standards to that. The provision of public improvements or financial guarantees can also be something you condition approval of a plat on. And then satisfaction of objections raised by other agencies. So if Hennepin County says they can't do this unless they do that, then that could be a condition of approval. When we're looking at preliminary plat, we're looking at the proposed street and lot layout, including lot sizes and dimensions, proposed easement, existing streets, and the relationship to existing streets, location map, general contours, significant vegetation. There is a public hearing. And already talked about that in 20 review period. Final plats only go to council, and so things are much more final at this stage, and so things do change, but it still needs to be compatible with the preliminary plat. So there might be some adjustments to the street and lot layout, but the number of the number of lots can't increase. It'll have the final lot dimensions. At that point, you'll have like block one, lot one, that'll all be identified. Street names will be shown. Or street names will be known, and they will at that time need to be committing to the vegetation to preserve and land certificate. So,
Natalie, what
Yeah.
do you mean by satisfaction of objections raised by other agents?
so like if Hennepin County said that, yeah, they didn't get a permit to have access onto a county road, they're only going to allow this if they put in a turn lane on a county road. That would have to be a condition of approval.
I got you. Thank you.
Site plan review, so our city code requires site plans for any use other than agricultural and single and two family homes. Every other type of use, so every time you see like a business coming in, they would need to do a site plan. And then we need to review this with consistency with our guiding documents, relationships to nearby uses, location and dimension of buildings, making sure that basically all the performance standards of our zoning ordinance are met. So that's the landscaping, signage, lighting, etc. And if they meet the standards that are outlined in our code, they should get approved. Must be approved. Conditional use permits, again, these are anticipated and allowed uses within our zoning ordinance, but they're recognized that conditions may be needed. So conditions can include buffers and screening to make it more compatible with the surrounding area. But the use may not be appropriate in areas where these conditions can't be met, so you can deny it if it can't provide those things because it's maybe too small of a lot and they're trying to fit something on there that's just not going to work. So with a CUP, you cannot attach a sunset clause. It runs with the land once it's been granted. If a condition of approval has been violated, it can be revoked, but it has to be something that was identified as a condition in the resolution. And there's a whole hearing process for that. And conditions must be reasonable and directly related to people. So it's the goal is to mitigate it, but you can't just require anything of the developer to get it approved. It has to be something to mitigate the effect it will have on the neighborhood. Interim use permits are very similar again, but they have that sunset clause. We have this with our conditional home occupation licenses, event centers, and we also have a temporary living quarter permit, and interim use permit. And again, if they conform to the zoning regulations and the standards that are outlined in our code, they should be approved. But the use will be temporary and terminate on a specific date or event. So if the land is sold, then it will get, the IUP goes away. It doesn't automatically renew when they sell the land, or maybe it's that they've identified a date by 2040, we don't want this operating anymore. So you either have to reapply at that point, or it's just gonna go away and you're done with that use. And there can be conditions, but the applicant will have to agree with those conditions. Kind of a weird wording. I remember talking with the city attorney. So you can add conditions, but the applicant has to agree. But isn't that what all of it is? And the city should not incur additional costs when an interim use permit is granted. Variances are tricky. The best way to put it. So this is a zoning relief mechanism that approves a departure from the standard ordinance. They should only be granted when there are practical difficulties, but approval is not required. You don't have to, even if you agree that there are practical difficulties. Economic considerations alone do not constitute a practical difficulty, and that is state statute. And use variances are not allowed in Minnesota. So if I want to operate a barber shop out of my house, but that was specifically something not allowed in my district, I cannot get a variance to allow that use. Again, there's always an exception to the rule. So if it, I don't even want to get into it, but there are exceptions to the rule in terms of if the use is contemplated in a standard district and there's like some non-conformities, there's some gray area. That's all I'll say. I've had discussions with the city attorney on that, but general rule of thumb, like if someone wants to do something that's not allowed in the district, they can't get a variance from it. They would have to rezone or do a zoning ordinance amendment. And a variance typically does not set a precedent. However, exception to the rule is they may set a precedent for applications with pretty much identical facts within a very similar time frame. So if someone grants me a variance for a deck that I want to put in that's going to encroach on a setback, and those findings of facts apply to my neighbor down the street, the same findings, and he applies within a couple of months, there is arguably a precedent set in that instance. After some time has gone by, even if the findings of fact are the same, after time has gone by, the city does have the opportunity to say, well, we learned from this, it wasn't a good idea, so we're not gonna grant it for you, but again, you would need findings of fact that basically support that.
We had a discussion around that exact example, and we said there would not be no precedent.
Yeah, I have a different opinion on that. I don't think any variance sets a precedent
Yeah.
because it's based on the unique site, physical characteristics of that site.
It is identical fact, like identical facts. So if it's, or basically identical facts that I have. So again, I talked to the city attorney, this was a training that I attended, I was blown away because I was always told they don't set a precedent, but they said that that was incorrect. So
So
there's some
for-
difference of opinion.
For me to be identical on that one, the lot would have to have the exact dimension, the house would have to be the exact dimension.
Have the exact same constraints are very similar.
Right.
So,
Same
yeah,
tree.
yeah,
Same tree in the
Same
same
grade.
spot.
yeah, yeah.
I
So
mean,
if
in
those
the
were,
magical world,
Yeah.
it's possible.
Yeah.
In real life,
Well, I'm thinking that, like, I, in my head, you know, I'm envisioning along 115 and the Chavera, like, it could be possible three or four houses apart.
the one that I think we're talking about, I can identify 3 lots that would have very similar considerations that if they were to come in, I think we probably would have granted it anyways because we took pity on the one, why we didn't take pity on the other? But I do think that there is some argument for a precedent based on conversations that I've had with the 2.
But obviously it's
attorneys
rare.
that have had it. Yeah, there is
Very,
very
very
specific
rare.
circumstances, but I do think that they're within a very close time frame where we really haven't had a chance to say, well, this was a bad idea because X, Y, and Z. There could be a precedent set for applications with nearly identical conditions.
and maybe not, so that we're on the same page, what I would say is what I think Natalie means to say in part, is it's really important the findings that you're making. Because then if somebody comes in and it's not exactly the same, your findings have said, it's because of this tree, your 8% grade, the narrowness of your lot, the findings become critically important because smart people can disagree about whether that's a precedent or not. But the findings are very important because those would be used by the neighbor to say, let my neighbor get a variance.
Mhm. So yeah, I would definitely say the argument is our findings of fact need to be clear and specific. The criteria that we have outlined in our city code in the review of variances is outdated. It's based on a hardship standard that has been it has not recently, but has been revised and updated in state language to practical difficulty standard, which is a bit different. So it's something that we need to update and it's on staff list of updates. But I already am incorporating more of the state review standards. When I do my staff reports, I try to incorporate their elements within the framework we already have. And so basically the property should be used in or the property request is to use the property in a reasonable manner. And there are circumstances unique to the property, not caused by the landowner or their predecessor. And so typically this has been interpreted to mean there's a physical constraints of the lot. We're not talking about, well, I don't get along with my neighbor, and so I should get a variance to break the ordinance because I want to do something different so that I don't have to see my neighbor. We're talking about, no, there is, I have so many wetlands on my property that should not be touched. And it's making it nearly impossible for me to comply with the ordinance as it's written. Something like that, or the terrain, or again, the some kind of constraint on the site that's making it difficult to be able to reasonably comply with our ordinance. And then the variance will not alter the essential character of the locality. Those are the 3 prongs that we want to hit before we are grant a variance under practical difficulty.
So can we agree that, I'm sorry, can you go back one? That bottom, you talked about the variance and setting precedent. Can we agree that sometimes lawyers get it wrong?
Yeah,
So caution is really the best policy, right?
oh, I agree. And again, I would go down to the findings of fact that we put into or a resolution of approval. And then planned unit development. I really don't want to hit you in the head with this one again. No,
Appreciated.
So
Can I
basically.
get a motion? I heard a skip. Can I get a second?
Okay, procedures. So we loosely, as a city, loosely follow Robert's Rules of Orders. So the planning commission do, some tips to run some more effective meetings would be to follow those as much as possible. And so we don't need to necessarily have everyone speak individually. If they have nothing to say, you can pass. We don't need to ask everyone twice. We can basically move forward with a motion if the discussion isn't adding anything new. And get the second on the plate. And if there is any further discussion, that can be held at that time, and then we can move forward with the vote. I put on here compliance with the 60-day rule, so I mentioned this was the plats a bit. The state has a statute that cities have to review and decide on land use applications within 60 days, otherwise they're effectively approved. We do have the ability to grant ourselves one 60-day extension, and then the applicant can make requests to extend as well. However, we do have hard deadlines that we're sometimes working under, and so that sometimes we'll have to do a special meeting if we're running up against the deadline, if we couldn't get a quorum to a regular meeting. And then we do operate under the open meeting law, which again is state statute, and essentially our meetings must be open to the public. And skip over it. Yeah, we do a pretty good job with meeting procedure. Okay, and then this again kind of goes back to our variance discussion, legally defensible decisions. We want to make sure that we're deciding something that's within our purview. That's our subject matter. Make sure that we're doing proper procedures. Did we notice the meeting, which is my job? Did we open the public hearing? Did we have a record of the decision? So a lot of that is staff administrative work, but we, as the planning commission, the public hearing is your main function, and that is important that we are holding that. We want to make sure that we're applying the proper standards as they're written in our code, have a rational basis for our decisions, or finding the fact are crucial, and have evidence presented in our records. So our resolutions usually have the findings of fact that discuss the evidence that we're basing our decision on. So people may bring up valid objections, and oftentimes they do. But when you as a commissioner simply don't like something, the default should be to apply the ordinance as written. And I'm gonna skip that. Yeah, we're good. We're all doing a pretty good job, so I'm not too worried about it. So yeah, just important to avoid advocating for or against a certain application before the public hearing. One thing to do after the public hearing's been held and to say your opinion, but before, try to remain impartial. Ex parte contact, so that's basically you as commissioners really should not be communicating. I think it's okay for one of you to communicate, one or two. The private conversations outside of public meetings undermine the open exchange and fair play. So you'll want to make sure that you're not discussing between you two. It's one thing to ask me questions about applications, but you don't want something to be a quorum essentially. So
Right, but you're required, but for a quorum, okay? If I want to talk to a fellow commissioner, I'm allowed to do that.
Yeah, like
It's-
one other, it's when you talk to two.
No, it's when you talk to a quorum.
Three together would be a quorum.
Yeah.
technically then.
Yeah, so
Right.
you want to be
No,
really careful.
but
So my
by
understanding,
using the word.
Well, the word,
Yeah.
I
It's
see,
a
yeah,
quorum.
fair enough.
So you also get into play when you talk to somebody that says, well, I talked to so-and-so.
yeah, that's
So
right.
you want to avoid passing conversation to third parties.
Right, because it's my understanding, I've had people come before us and say, well, I talked to the old mayor. You said this was okay. So, so I do agree.
And you gotta remember too, when you're talking in the public, you're talking for yourself, you're not talking for the commission. Same with council, I don't talk for the rest of the council, when I talk to the council, I'm voting in chamber. And then I can say, well, council, if I'm in the public, I can say, well, council voted this way. Otherwise, everything else is my personal opinion.
So yeah, I think it's just the idea that you want to be careful about discussing upcoming applications in the public, pretty much. And you want to make sure that when you're talking with each other, like when I email you the packet, you're all blind CC, or you're supposed to be. It's an error if I didn't do that. But you're supposed to be blind CC because the idea is if you hit reply all, we now have a quorum. So it's one thing for you to email me individually and for me to discuss with you individually, but when you have a email chain specifically about the content of the packet, that could be a problem. So, and then, yeah, just want to avoid conflicts of interest, which are typically when you have a financial stake in a decision that you're recommending or making. Yeah, sorry. So the 2040 comprehensive plan, but I feel like we already talked a lot about it. Just wanted to go a brief overview of chapter 1 and chapter 2. The city's vision for the 2040 comprehensive plan was that the city of Corcoran in 2040 would be a vibrant community defined by our dynamic town center, strong base of commercial and industrial businesses, variety of housing options, and high value natural resources.
And relay stations,
Relay stations?
yeah, in our vibrant downtown area.
Oh,
Electric substation.
Electric, yeah.
so there's a lot more meat to it, but essentially the idea that we're what guided our comprehensive plan was this idea to have housing options and a strong base for commercial and industrial businesses. We have guiding principles, 5 guiding principles. So the protection of natural resources, open space and rural character, creation of opportunities, again, for retail, office and residential, creation of opportunities for expanded employment and tax bases, expansion of residential options to achieve life cycle housing, and support of rural residential development in non-urbanized Corcoran. So these are the guiding principles that help identify our land use map categories that will come up here. And so it is a 297-page document with 11 chapters, and we update it every 10 years. There's a lot to it. But the Metropolitan Council issues customized forecasts and system statements to communities that must be accounted for within the city's comprehensive plan. And so this map, it is the community designations, and that helps identify some of the density requirements. So early stages, the east and south portion of the city are identified as emerging suburban edge. And this is communities that have early stages of transitioning into urbanized levels of development, and they're expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth at average densities of at least 3 to 5 units per acre.
So how do we reconcile that with the previous slide though?
Well, so then
If
the
you can go back one slide.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile that with number 5? Support of rural residential
In the-
development
yeah.
in non-urbanized Corcoran. Do we accomplish that by cramming 3 to 5 units onto an acre?
The very next point I was going.
That's
to.
the
Oh, I'm sorry.
urbanized area.
I didn't mean to throw you off your.
Okay, let me just get through it. So the rural, so then the other part of the town that's not the emerging suburban edge is the diversified rural part of Corcoran, and that's the majority of the city. These are communities that have a variety of rural type land uses, including very large residential housing, large lot residential housing, clustered housing, hobby farms, and other agricultural uses. And they are expected to plan for growth not to exceed forecasts and are in patterns that do not exceed 4 units per 40 acres, so 1 in 10 acres. There are some exceptions for open space and preservation plans. So these are expected to manage land uses. So cities are expected to manage the land uses in this area to prevent premature demand for extension of urban services, and so that existing service levels will meet needs. So yeah, we definitely have a impending urbanized portion of Corcoran that has different density targets than the rural part of Corcoran.
I do not want to take us down a rabbit hole, and maybe it's a quick question, if it's not, we will cast it aside. Is there a reason why on a big scale, agriculture does not have its own zoning or land use? Why is it coupled with rural residential? Because as rural residential develops, then goes the way of agriculture, pushing it farther away from urban areas. Is there an easy answer to that?
I don't have it. Do you
Okay.
have anything to that?
Great question.
So then, but
The only thing I would say.
Yep.
On that note, the one agriculture designation we have is if you're in the agricultural preserve program.
Yeah,
That is a different land use designation than rural residential.
right,
So for true functioning long-term farms,
but it still has a sunset clause that has to be reapplied for, so it's not like a,
they don't have to initiate expiration. So the city could eventually decide that that's not compatible,
Sure.
but I don't think that's something that we've done typically.
okay,
There's like very limited, triggers that would end it. But they can just apply and not initiate expiration, and they could be in that for years to come. Yeah.
Is that why those
yeah.
few parcels are? in there?
Yes, I agree. Yep, yep.
Do you know roughly how much ag preserve we have in the community?
I don't have that number. off the top
Hennepin
of my
County
head.
does have its government sort of working against itself sometimes, for as
Mhm.
much as there's development, there is a separate segment of the Hennepin County that is trying to preserve agriculture, and they're reaching out to landowners as much as they can to try to get folks to preserve their land, but.
I don't have that number, John, but Commissioner, but it is in the comp plan.
Okay.
Next slide. So I wanted to, this is a map I reference quite a bit in the staff report, with the natural resource inventory area. So again, this is in the very first chapter, because it's looking at where we currently are. And these are areas that have some value, especially the high quality natural community. So when PUDs especially come in, anybody coming in that's looking to do a PUD, this is a map that we look to. Okay, well, it looks like you have some natural resources. You should make every effort to preserve as many as possible. So this is a key reference point that I use regularly. And then there are 6 goals that were developed in chapter 2 for our land use chapter. Basically, again, to ensure housing development is compatible with existing and adjacent land uses, and providing a variety of housing types, creating new land use opportunities for expanding the city's tax base, attracting and encouraging new industrial and professional services, and creating a community with housing, employment, and service uses that reinforce our overall vision, while working to retain key elements that define our rural character, such as wetlands, streams, wooded areas, natural topography, and view corridors. And again, ensuring the zoning and subdivision ordinances are consistent with our comprehensive plan. So our 2040 plan identifies the location and intensity of anticipated development within the city, and establishes a framework in which that development may occur while supporting our community vision and guiding principles from the first chapter. So this is our future land use map. So the MUSA. Yeah, oh yeah, everything in brown here is the ag preserve. We have a couple of ag preserves in the MUSA. Some of them are expiring or have recently expired, but
Right, the expiration, so I just want to clarify, I don't mean to derail, but
Mhm.
when something is designated land use commercial, that cannot be changed by the landowner, correct? So if something is designated, commercial, like we did along 30, but it's
Mhm.
currently residential, when that individual sells, it has to become commercial. There's not another option without an amendment to the comp plan. Is that correct? But in the agricultural preserve program, it's entirely up to the landowner whether that stays agricultural or not.
to some extent. So if it expires from the ag preserve and they don't re-enroll, then we typically would look at the surrounding land use. So this one, the ag preserve right here that doesn't currently have an expiration date, when that were to go away, we could probably look at that being a low family or low density residential area.
And so that in effect is why all eggs then eventually leave.
Yeah.
It's not protected.
But I'm just curious why it's entirely up to the landowner, that land use designation then changing Versus like if something is decided by a comp plan that it's going to be commercial, industrial, residential, that can't be changed by that particular landowner.
Well, they can ask for a comprehensive plan amendment, and
Okay.
when they choose, essentially, when they choose to come out of Act Reserve, which is a 1/40 density.
Yep.
It defaults in the rural residential area to rural residential, which is 1/10.
Yep.
So that's their choice to do that. In the MUSA, you can always ask for a comprehensive plan amendment. Landowners have a choice to ask.
And they can, so when we do our comp plan update, they can bring that request forward without it necessarily being an application. So if it's something that they are thinking like, well, really, I would like to have the option to be a part of this mixed unit mixed use property that's adjacent to my north, I want to extend that boundary. That would be something that we could consider as part of the update.
Okay, and to clarify, I'm not trying to say that someone shouldn't have the option to leave an ag further. I just think as we urbanize and that urbanized area grows larger, how do we also maintain agriculture within those areas so that we're not paying an arm and a leg for our food to get to the city? So that's the intent behind my line of questioning. It's not to make these folks, stay in agriculture. Just want to see, if how we accomplish that moving forward with future goals.
Well, they can continue to farm no matter what it's going to. It doesn't include, they don't stop farming at that point.
Right, my thing is like a city develops a plan and says, we want our commercial here, we want our industrial here, but generally, as like Maple Grove, there's no farms in Maple Grove anymore, right? Because clearly, as the plan was decided, the ag wasn't a zoned I guess the closest it would be is commercial, am I correct?
Yeah.
Because our commercial allows greenhouses.
Yeah, we do have greenhouse allowances in a few different zoning districts that are within the MUSA, and I have to look at it. Minneapolis is not a great example, but I know there's other urban city, like cores that have urban farm options. It looks different. It's more vertical than horizontal.
Right.
But there are still options, there are still opportunities, and we certainly can look to, as a city, we could certainly look at making sure our policies can prevent something like that. Anyway, so for, basically, the average for everything, either east or south of the purple line, which is our MUSA line, the average density needs to come out to between 3 to 5 units per acre. Everything in the yellow, is our low density area, which is that 3 to 5 target. And then we have some areas where higher density can be allowed, such as the mixed use, which is in pink. We have this kind of striped red area, which is a mixed residential, which allows for a different, more housing opportunities that can be a little denser. So we don't have a lot of those areas, but we don't have a lot of those areas developed currently either. So that is something that we could be seeing more of.
What is the brown square? What's the density there? Yeah,
That's our, that's the high density
I
residential.
think so.
Yeah, so that is like. No, mixed. Oh, did I put on here? High density residential is 10 to 30 units per acre.
10 to 30 units per acre.
Mhm.
You get to pull existing residential out of the equation.
No. I thought we couldn't, because existing residential.
Oh, maybe I listened. So when you do the comprehensive plan to show that you meet the 3 units an acre, you don't count existing neighborhoods in that calculation for that 3 to 11. It's a very complicated formula with changes every time. But it's really looking forward to make sure that the development that's coming meets it. So if you've got vacant existing residential, you do count that towards it, but neighborhoods that are developed, you don't.
You said it doesn't count against you.
Yeah, so we have 14 land use designations. I won't go through them all, but the idea being that the comp plan has identified the anticipated density, and staff and consultants had to, well, there wasn't staff, and it was just consultants, but consultants with the community.
Well, Mike.
Oh, Mike did help, yeah. So have gone through the formula process to get us to the target that we needed to get to reach, satisfy the system statements from the Met Council while trying to incorporate the community vision. So, this was the staging, plan. Yes, sorry, staging plan. This is again, just kind of showing, the areas of the city where municipal services are available now or should be relatively available, or they are it's accessible, it's fairly nearby, it's doable, we have the capacity for it. Everything outside of our current stage, which is 2020 to 25, which is the darker pink that's showing up on here. Everything else is in our second stage, and we may or may not have capacity for it. So everything in the southeast district, we are running pretty close to our sewer capacity. Everything in our northeast district, the water tower is really needed for things to continue moving forward there. So there are limits, and I would say that from my understanding, when this was first adopted for the 2020 comprehensive plan, stage one was pretty much the same properties that are currently in stage one, and each update has led to the stages being further delayed. Yeah. Next slide.
It's hard to see from the map where the future use expansion areas are. Can you highlight those, or can you describe where those are?
So this shows basically the furthest that we're going on to 2035, 2040. So everything yellow is where that's our last stage of planning at this time for sewer and water. There are some areas that are east, because those are existing neighborhoods. The idea being we don't want to force existing neighborhoods to connect until.
You mean the area of the future expansion, John?
Yeah, the future.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you said. So, yeah, so the area that's really kind of a huge question mark at this point, but that is basically a study zone that the Met Council said they were going to do before our next update, so we can better plan for it. My understanding is that it used to be that Loretto might be able to supply services or might be able to connect to that system, but that may no longer be true. Medina is not an option, so it might be that we're connecting from Rogers, and so there's it needs to be studied further. So that's a huge question mark. So I would say that's definitely 2035 to 2040, if not further out.
And just some additional context, and Councilmember Schultz probably remembers this. We were doing a joint study with the Met Council, Loretto, Maple Plain, and Medina, and we had to identify at least 1,000 acres that could connect to that sewer. And so that's how that line got drawn, to show that if they did provide additional capacity in that area, we would be developing enough to support it. So that's the sizing comes from that, and there wasn't a ton of beyond getting to that minimum acreage to start the study. There was not a ton of analysis on that. So we're hoping that the Met Council is planning to kick that off because they promised to have that study done before 2025.
Before the comp plan updates done.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a huge question. This is our zoning map. Pretty much everything that's not in the stage one of phasing, but within the MUSA is within our urban reserve. Some key exceptions to that would be the golf courses shown. So everything else is within our first stage, and they're showing zoning that reflects the underlying land use. The urban reserve is basically a holding zone to try to encourage things to remain the same as they are for the foreseeable future until they have access to city sewer and water to prevent premature development that really doesn't, that is inconsistent with the comp plan and the density goals that we need to meet. And then most of our city is still white with the rural residential color. And again, most of the city, and we are 1 in 10 acres, which gets me to our development maps, I believe is right. Our development rights map. So it might come up when we have plats in our rural residential area. Properties were assigned development rights kind of changed throughout the years. It was a program developed in 1980. But at this time, if you haven't already developed, the property rights are based on one right for every 10 acres that you have. So if you have 120 acres, you have 12 development rights. So you could do a 12-unit subdivision if you're within the rural residential. There are some options for properties within the urban reserve that also have development rights for some use of those rights too. The idea for those, they would need to put most of the land into an outlot that could be used for future developments in that case. But otherwise, if you're in the rural residential, you can just do a straight plat. We also have an open space and preservation plat that allows for some density bonuses. But again, you're putting most of the land aside as open space so that if things were to ever urbanize, there is some space for proper, not proper, but the efficient use of infrastructure and services if that were to redevelop. But the key takeaway is if someone doesn't have a development right, or it doesn't have as many developments as they would like, they aren't going to get a new one. So with the only exception being if they were to plat to an adjacent property, you can pool the rights that way. But it has to be something that's literally sharing a property line, so that could be within the same plat. So it can be contentious. We do have a development rights appeal process, and it has come up to the council a couple of times now since I started working here 2 years ago. But they're not supposed to grant one out of thin air. It's supposed to be based on the map and our records of the all. Next slide. Okay, so real quick, I have a couple slides on homeowners associations. I believe one of the questions related to homeowners associations that the council has, what is their role and what can the city do to prevent an HOA from overstepping with aesthetic requirements? So homeowners associations are regulated and authorized by the Minnesota Common Interest Ownership Act. And cities must be careful that we do not indirectly or directly prevent or prohibit HOAs from being created. So basically they're communities, common interest communities, and they do have a right to exist. And further, the city cannot impose requirements on HOAs that would not be imposed upon physically similar development. Next slide. So under the Minnesota statute that allows HOAs, they specifically have the right to regulate the use of common elements, regulate the use of units and the conduct of unit occupants, regulate or prohibit animals, regulate changes in the appearance of common elements and conduct which may damage the common interest community. And then this is the one that I think Commissioner Brumman wanted to understand. They have the right to regulate the exterior appearance of the common interest community, including balconies, patios, window treatments, and signs. So the city really should not try to prevent those aesthetic requirements that come up in HOA documents. Because it would arguably start to infringe on the private right properties, private rights. Oh my God, I can't talk. The property right of the HOA. There we go. I apologize.
What about a boat?
What about a boat?
Well, can an HOA prohibit someone from keeping a boat in their driveway? Because
Correct.
that's
Or
an exterior,
Or I mean,
Correct.
I would imagine.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
and I know it's not simply because those are the listed things, it is not comprehensive. Correct, that list of the things that are allowed to be regulated on the exterior, so gardens. right?
Oh,
Like that-
including, for example, yeah.
So I'm saying
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
not listed,
They
but
they
it could
can,
potentially be
they
regulated.
can literally regulate the
So
color
that
of
is
your
not
flowers. Yeah.
comprehensive list.
Yeah.
Those are the items.
Yes, yeah, they can regulate the color of your fence, how tall your fence is, how opaque your fence is. They can regulate what kind of trees and bushes you have. Now, you as a property owner buying into that can decide whether or not you're okay with it. I think that's the argument. You don't have to buy into an HOA that you don't agree with. So it's very
As
important.
long as the city has homes available for sale that are not HOA driven, because I think the previous slide talked about not prohibiting. I kind of see, since that is a general trend, I also want to make sure we're not
Requiring. it.
requiring it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that's fair, and I don't think all HOAs are going to be that nitpicky. But the idea being, if you have a community that has a common space and, you know, even just like your backyard, might decide as a group or as property owners within the same group that you really don't want fences in those backyards because you want your kids to be able to play in the backyard or something like that. And so you have in your HOA documents, you adopt a rule that prevents fences to begin with, or prevents fences in certain instances. So that would be, as a city, we shouldn't prevent that because then we're starting to infringe on their private property rights as homeowners that are within a common association. So it kind of goes back to that. So I get what you're saying. We definitely don't want to be doing anything that makes it basically mandatory to have an HOA. But there are instances where people fully know that that's what they're getting into and prefer it for whatever reason.
And then any such grievance they have, they follow through their HOA process.
Exactly, they have a board process, yeah.
Okay.
Do we have any guidance as to how high the HOA fees are as a percentage to if it's a rental community?
No, I didn't look anything up about the HOA.
Curious,
fees.
it gets expensive for people.
Yeah,
The HOAs are crazy sometimes.
yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, again, it depends on the board, so it's like my board for my HOA has really been very conscious about some of the people who are more affected by the economic downturn than others. And so they've been really committed to not raising our fees and trying to find ways to, you know, reduce the insurance and reduce the maintenance costs that our HOA fees or HOA dues cover. And then I have other friends who have been HOAs and they're just raising them left and right.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the board, and if someone was stuck in it, I would just recommend that they get on the board or they at least show up and use their voting power. Yeah, so.
Yeah, under the law, after the last recession, new laws were passed that now require HOAs to be stockpiling money for maintenance in the HOA. That wasn't happening before, and that was really creating some hardships too. So I think you've seen some of the dues go up, rightfully so that homeowners are protected when the roofs need to be replaced in association. What was happening is they were deferring maintenance because they didn't have money in the bank. And so the state passed some new regulations about that and what their legal responsibilities are as an HOA board to help protect homeowners.
Also pretty significantly impacted by amenities, more amenities, more things to pay for, more things to care for, more things to, you know, fix at some point or replace at some point, so.
Definitely. So then, so HOAs still must comply with city regulations as long as those regulations are applied uniformly across developments physically similar. HOAs as rules are believed to complement, support, and strengthen local governments by providing vital services to their members and having mechanisms to implement and closely watch compliance with local policies, programs, and ordinances. So if you're part of an HOA, your HOA board may be more likely to see a code violation and want to be, they might have processed themselves to cite you outside of the city and get compliance before the city even needs to get involved.
And though they have to comply with city regulations, they can be more constrictive than city regulations. So I think
To some extent, the one exception is a covenant is not enforceable if it effectively discriminates against the homeowner in terms of like protected groups can't have an HOA provision that says, well, you can't be here because you believe this or you are this gender or
Can't build a ramp to your front door if you're handicapped.
yeah, I would say anything that has like the effect of being discriminative by law, then that would not be enforceable. And so generally you don't see a lot of I haven't come across something like that, but I'm sure they exist and it's simply just not, they wouldn't be able to enforce it. Some states have enacted laws that void HOA regulations that prohibit the use of solar panels and or solar drying, i.e. a clothesline. But Minnesota,
Took a committee to come up with that.
I didn't make that.
Natalie finds these new terms that we've never heard of.
I tried. So Minnesota has not done either of these. There have been a couple of bills that have kind of gone nowhere in the past couple of years. Just, it's something that may come eventually where you do have a right to solar and HOA shouldn't be preventing that. So
And that has to occur at the state level, or is that a city?
that is,
Can that
that
occur?
is a state, so that is, states have enacted laws, that's why HOA regulations, I would be very hesitant to say that we could do that
As a city.
as a city. I would want that to be something on the state level, knowing that the state has authorized them to the ability to regulate exteriors. Yeah, yeah. So, anyway, that's HOAs, that's our training. Thank you so much for
Thank
letting
you.
me ramble.
Well, what was I going? Shoot,
What are you
I had a
trying?
question.
Huh?
I said, shoot, I had
Oh,
a
I heard
question
my wife.
related to.
Oh,
Oh, that is my question. So regarding the time frame in which an HOA assumes responsibility is at what point in a development, especially if there are multiple phases. So we think about Tavera, it's got like 8 or 9 phases. At what point is the HOA responsible for something? Say if grading goes wrong and there's a water issue, when can the developer say that's the homeowners association to pay for? And when can the developer be held responsible for that still, because it's in the development phase?
Anything that's development related is the developer's responsibility. So they remain on the hook until the public improvements are complete. However, in a multi-phase development, typically the developer maintains control of the HOA until 70 to 80% of the lots are sold. And at that point, they turn over control of the HOA to the resident. However, as I said, they are still responsible for all of the public improvements until the city accepts the public improvements and the warranty period ends.
In the warranty period. Okay, and then final question is, if a neighborhood were to decide they no longer wanted to be an HOA, do they have the, through vote or whatever their process is, can they disband? Because the reason I ask is I know that some of the neighborhoods originally developed in Maple Grove had associations, homeowners associations at the time, but 20 years after the fact, there were no longer homeowners associations. And so there wasn't anything on record when the sale of these homes went through. So how does that happen? And is it different from the current process?
What I can say is the current process is all of the HOA covenants are reviewed by staff and ultimately the city attorney. And what we've been requiring in HOAs is so HOAs can disband, but Bellwether's a great example. There's a lot of stuff that HOA has responsibility for long-term that the city does not want to take over. And so we have conditions in the HOA that they can't decide, they're no longer going to be responsible for that amenity center and they're going to just let the city deal with it. That is not allowed. Any changes to the things that the HOA is responsible for under the HOA documents we've approved recently require city approval for any change. If there was an existing HOA, for example, in town, Acacia Hills up here.
Yep.
They probably don't have one, but if they did, and there was no common association amenity type thing, the city might sign off on that and say, that's fine, you can disband. But I think if there was some common elements that needed to be taken care of, we could say, under our current rules, we could say, no, you can't.
So then I'm sorry, I don't mean to drag this out, but I have 2 other questions. So related to that, if we then are creating neighborhoods where we're asking for visual, identifiers, gazebos, if we're asking for focal points, if we're asking for recreational material in these open spaces, are we then in effect saying we are advocating for more HOA neighborhoods than not?
So I would, the open space, unless the city agrees to take that on, which would be an option as outlined in the current.
Like if
ordinance.
it was a park,
So
right?
there's- Yeah. so
And
it-
maybe mowed and stuff like
Yeah,
that,
but-
or it's even an outlot. Right?
Oh, yeah, Yeah, well, so, well, sometimes OSMP though, it's the individual that owns the outlet, like they're farming it, but there might be, there's.
Stormwater ponding and development is considered an outlaw, right?
Mhm,
So
Yeah.
that's gotta go somewhere.
yeah,
Get some trails and some of them.
Well, trails become property of the city unless they're private trails.
so you could have, the stormwaters don't have to be an outlet, it could be on a property.
Right, I think your Commissioner Roman's point though was the amenities, if
Yep,
we're
yeah,
requiring
correct.
amenities.
Yep.
Yeah, so,
That.
Are we all of a
that
sudden-
require An HOA.
so the open space requirement, yeah, I would say that nearly requires an HOA. Because, we're not gonna take on, some of them we might, but we're not gonna take on a lot of those open space areas. And so it would have to go into an outlot, or it'd have to be an area. The only other thing I can think of is if it's an area where it's someone's yard, but it's not supposed to be someone's yard specifically in that, way it's drafted right now. So yes, that would, in a low residential area, it would make it very difficult to not have an HOA if it's a PUD.
So then my second, right, which is my concern, because I understand we don't want to prohibit, but I don't think that's the side that we're erring on lately in development. I think, and I don't think it's the intent. I think the intent is to create to hold developers to a strong standard, but my concern is, and not just because I don't like HOAs, that is not that's not the thing. Part of it is the additional economic hurdle that's then being added to purchasing or living in that neighborhood. My second question is, you were talking about receiving the HOA documents and then being able to say, well, this is what the city permits and what doesn't. At what point do they have to supply HOA documents to the city? Because the reason this came up is Bechtold Farms came here and they were both like, oh, we're rural people, we're developing this great rural neighborhood. And they didn't have any HOAs, didn't have any outline of what the HOA it would be. And then in effect, when they started selling the lots, there was an HOA, and the HOA was some of these people have like 10-acre lots and there's like no animals. And you can't have like, so it was, and that's fine. I'm just saying, I would have liked to have an opportunity, or is that not even in our purview when talking about a preliminary plat?
So for that instance, they didn't have any common space, so we didn't review those HOA documents.
Okay,
'cause
so
we
it's
didn't.
only when,
Yeah, so or if it's
Amendment.
or if there's a condition of approval that they need to meet, but that they did that of their own volition.
sure,
And they have a right by state law to regulate
yeah,
things like animals on the property as well. And I think that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to be able to regulate the exterior and have like certain architectural elements to have community within the neighborhood, or a uniformity, I should say, in the neighborhood. And so I didn't hear about the animal thing, but they do have the right to say we don't want
Yeah.
farm animals. Yeah.
And timing wise, we don't require that to be submitted till the final plat.
so when final plat goes before council, then council sees the HOA documents. So nobody, the planning commission and council doesn't get to see those documents before everything has already been approved, and we said there's nothing that we could do, save, put some conditional clauses in the common space or the amenity.
Yeah, again, because we can't control what the
Yep.
HOA does. What we do when we review it with the city attorney is make sure we're protecting the city.
Okay.
So we don't end up with a liability
Sure.
because an HOA defaults on stuff and now we have to maintain.
A
the
swimming pool or
amenities.
some pickleball courts, okay.
And I want to be mindful of everyone's time, but first, I just want to say thank you, everyone. This is a great discussion and I appreciate it. Councilman, thank you for attending. I would like to ask you though about license plate cameras, not to be confused with red light cameras. I've done some research. St. Cloud has one. Bloomington has one. Medina has 0. Eden Prairie has one at the entrance to City Hall, which I think is kind of chilling. Minneapolis has 0. St. Paul has 0. And I'm wondering what's driving the request to bring one to Corcoran?
Well, it's about networking. I mean, we have a limited amount of these presence in the state,
Right,
and so do our neighboring communities.
right.
So it's the ability to share information. So if you have an Amber Alert, a car drives through there, or a stolen car, if it's picked up on that camera, that gets relayed
Okay.
So that information can be shared quicker.
But it can't be shared quickly because if that access to that information would require a warrant, I've been told.
Yeah, I'd have to refer to.
I'm just concerned that, I would think that Minneapolis would have a greater need than we would. And I come out of the law enforcement background and it's my understanding that, if I drive down the road, the fact that I drove down the road, that information is now being stored by a private sector company. And in order for our police department to access that, that's going to require a court order. So I guess I'm uncomfortable having my personal driving routine being collected and stored by a private company.
I can see your point, but I would suggest if you have a phone on you, your private driving information is stored on Google's webpage right now. And that information is being sold.
But
to
that
everybody.
would require a warrant for law enforcement to access.
For law enforcement. I'm not sure exactly. We're exploring it at this point, so.
Okay, well, I just as a citizen, I have a lot of concerns about this.
Yeah, I can
So,
understand.
all right, but I do appreciate your feedback. Thank you. Can I?
Planning
Is there
project
anything
update.
else? Planning project update?
Oh, planning project update.
Thank you for your training.
Yeah,
I really do appreciate
Well,
it.
you did say 20 minutes. I just want to get on record. I'm just saying.
In all fairness, we did.
But I tried my best, but yeah, it's a lot to go through and hopefully we have a strong team. We have, I don't need to repeat some of this next year. And we can focus on some other topics of interest that you guys identify.
Did everyone do the lead training?
I did the lead training tonight. I couldn't make it work. They decided to take it off the community webpage. You needed an account to sign up and their emails weren't gonna be, it was.
I will say I kind of missed the Jeopardy game though. That was really.
Oh,
cool.
thank you. I put a couple of years in that. I put a lot of effort into that, so I appreciate
It was
what
fun.
that.
Yeah. Well, do we have any questions on what are we calling
Planning
it here?
project update.
Planning project updates?
I did not.
Any questions? No?
Yeah,
All right. What other?
There's the city council. Report.
Oh,
So-
okay.
I was on, I'll give you some background. I was on planning commission for 4 years, something like that, and then at the city council. And I was the planning commission liaison for the city council liaison planning commission for 2 years after that. So I view my role as here as listening and answering questions at this point. I won't go through reading the report. If you have a report on the planning from staff, but if you have any questions on that or anything else, I'm happy to answer it.
I was just curious, sir, about the Corcoran meat lot. Like it says, provided direction to the property owner related to zoning inquiries and the purchase of the property. I was just curious what was going on with that.
it was grandfathered. I was at the meeting though. I can tell you.
I just was curious what it is, what's going on.
So they're Javison inherited the business, she's trying to decide what to do with it. She has, from my understanding, a year from Joe's death to do something with the business, either to reopen it, I mean, she can sell it anytime she wants. She's looking for options, what the city would support. As far as the business, if it was sold to somebody else, or if they ran it themselves, given the changes in their own building it's out there.
And to clarify, it is not currently a use that is allowed in that area.
Ah.
So if there was a sale, there would have to be a change.
Well, unless the sale happens, like, they need to resume operations. So if they sold it and they can operate as is
Without any change.
without any changes, then they can resume tomorrow. But if it's past the year marker when operations cease, then we're having this loading. Because you can't give a use variance.
Yeah, some of the regulations they may have to apply to are outside of the scope.
Yeah.
So,
Because it's not a county road.
on
Well,
two
they have,
counties.
they have issues with the county and they may have issues with Department of Health, you know, as a business, so there's a lot of things that are outside our purview.
Well, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. Can I get a second?
Sorry.
Unless
do you
I'm
need to
missing
confirm-
something.
I think usually you just like, does this look right? Everybody go through with the.
Oh, yeah, is everyone okay
With
with
the
the
liaison.
liaison schedule? I'll tell you, if anyone does have like a last minute conflict, please just let me know. I'd be more than happy to substitute. Anything
I'll make a
else?
motion to adjourn.
I'll second it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.